The sun was a malevolent eye in the vast, unforgiving sky, baking the earth into a cracked, brittle hide. Ethan Thorne squinted, his gaze sweeping across the parched expanse of his ranch. The Golden Creek. The name, once a testament to a flowing tributary, now felt like a cruel joke. The creek bed was a dusty scar, a memory of water and life. It had been 6 months since the last decent rain, and the land was screaming in silent agony. His cattle, once a proud herd, were gaunt and listless, their ribs showing through their hides like bony fences. Ethan, a man in his late 30s whose face was a map of sun-etched lines and weathered determination, ran a hand over his chin, feeling the scratch of a few days' growth. His father had built this ranch from nothing, had taught him every trick of the trade, but a drought like this was a force of nature no man could tame. The local town, Harmony Creek, was a ghost of its former self. The saloon was quiet. The general store's shelves were half empty, and the faces of the people held a shared, silent desperation. They looked to Ethan, not as a leader, but as the one who always found a way. But this time, he was running out of ways. He mounted his horse Whisper, a steadfast quarter horse with a coat the color of dried hay, and rode out towards the western edge of his property. He was chasing an old man's tale, a rumor passed down from his grandfather about a hidden spring, a vein of life buried beneath a massive, unyielding stone at the base of the Blackfoot Mesa. It was a fool's errand, a last resort born of desperation. The stone, known locally as the Sleeper, was a gargantuan slab of granite, too heavy for one man to move. Generations had tried and failed, dismissing it as just another rock. But Ethan, with nothing left to lose, had an idea. He'd spent the last few days rigging a pulley system with a thick rope and a couple of iron poles, anchored to a sturdy juniper tree. Reaching the site, he dismounted and patted Whisper's neck. The air shimmered with heat, and the only sound was the drone of cicadas and the occasional creak of his leather saddle. The stone was immense, its surface smooth from eons of wind and rain. Ethan looped the rope around the stone, testing the tension. He felt a flicker of hope, a fragile thing he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months. He pulled with all his might, the muscles in his back and arms straining, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The rope bit into his hands, and a groan escaped his lips as he tugged and pulled. For a moment nothing happened. He let go, breathing heavily, and adjusted his grip. He had to try again. This was the last chance. He leaned into the rope, using his entire body weight, gritting his teeth. Slowly, agonizingly, the massive stone began to shift. A low, grinding rumble echoed across the mesa as it moved inch by painful inch. Dust billowed up, and the air filled with the scent of dry earth and stone. With a final Herculean heave, the stone tilted, then crashed down a few feet away with a thunderous thud. Ethan stumbled back, wiping sweat from his brow, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He looked into the space where the stone had been. There was no gushing spring, no vein of life, just a small shallow hollow in the rock, filled with nothing but dust and a few scattered pebbles. A wave of profound disappointment washed over him, a cold dread that settled deep in his gut. He had been a fool. The old man's tale was just that, a tale. He was about to turn away, to admit defeat, when he noticed something. Tucked into the hollow, half buried by the dust, was a small, tattered bundle of cloth. It was a strange place for someone to leave something. Curiosity overriding his despair, he knelt and reached for it. As his fingers made contact, he felt a faint, almost imperceptible warmth. He pulled the bundle out, the rough fabric worn and stained. He carefully unfolded the layers, and his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just cloth. Inside, wrapped tightly, was a child, a little girl, no older than 4 or 5, her face streaked with dirt, her tiny body curled into a ball. She was pale, her breathing shallow and ragged. Her eyelids fluttered and she whimpered, a sound so small and fragile it was almost lost to the wind. Ethan stared, his mind reeling. How? Why? Who would leave a child in such a desolate place? He gently touched her cheek, and her skin felt hot, feverish. She was so small, so defenseless. A flicker of anger, hot and fierce, surged through him. He was no hero, no savior, just a desperate rancher looking for water. But looking at her, helpless and alone, something shifted inside him. This wasn't just a rock, a spring, a myth. This was a human being, a child, a life. He couldn't just leave her. He carefully picked her up, her weight almost nothing in his arms. She was so frail, so fragile, a stark contrast to the harsh world around them. He carried her back to Whisper, the horse whinnying softly as if sensing the gravity of the situation. He cradled her close, her head resting against his chest, her fevered breathing a soft rasp against his shirt. He mounted Whisper and turned back towards the ranch, the relentless sun still beating down. But now, the world felt different. He hadn't found water, but he had found something else entirely, something he never could have imagined. And as he rode, he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that his life had just changed forever. The drought was still a threat, a looming disaster, but now a new and far more profound responsibility had been laid at his feet. He had lifted the stone, and in doing so, he had unearthed not a miracle for his land, but a miracle for his heart. The ride back to the ranch was a slow, deliberate one. Ethan held the little girl carefully, adjusting his grip every few minutes to ensure she was comfortable, her small body jostling gently with Whisper's gait. He could feel her weak pulse through her thin shirt, a frantic, tiny beat against his arm. She remained mostly unconscious, occasionally letting out a soft whimper that tore at his gut. He cursed the scorching heat, the very same heat that had brought him to this point, now threatening this innocent life he had just discovered. As he approached the ranch, the familiar sight of his home felt both foreign and sacred. The main cabin, the bunkhouse, the dusty corrals, all were now a backdrop to a new, unexpected reality. He dismounted carefully at the main cabin, carrying the girl into the cool, dark interior. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, leather, and dust. He laid her down gently on his cot, the faded wool blanket a soft contrast to her grime-streaked skin. He lit a lantern, its flickering light illuminating the tiny details of her face, a small freckled nose, long eyelashes, and a mess of tangled brown hair. She looked exhausted, starved, and terribly alone. His mind raced, a whirlwind of practicalities and profound questions. He was a rancher, not a doctor. He knew how to mend a fence, break a horse, and treat a sick steer. But this was different. He needed to get water into her, carefully. He found a clean cloth and a basin of water he'd been rationing for himself. He dipped the cloth in the cool water and gently wiped the dirt and sweat from her face and arms. As the clean skin was revealed, he noticed a thin, jagged scar that ran from her left temple down to her jawline. It was a new, angry-looking wound. A shiver of unease ran down his spine. This wasn't just a lost child. Something terrible had happened to her. He found a clean shirt, one of his old ones that was soft with age, and tore a piece from the bottom to use as a makeshift bandage. He cleaned the wound as best he could, but knew she needed more than he could offer. He needed to get her to a real doctor, a real town. Harmony Creek was a few hours' ride, but it was their only chance. He carefully lifted her up again, her body limp in his arms. She was a featherweight, too thin for her age. "Just hold on, little one," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm going to get you help." He laid her back on the cot, and she stirred, her eyes fluttering open. They were a startling shade of green, wide and terrified. She looked at him, her expression a mix of confusion and fear. He knelt beside the cot, his large frame a stark contrast to her smallness. He offered her a small tin cup of water, holding it to her lips. She hesitated, her eyes fixed on his. He offered a gentle, reassuring smile, and she slowly, weakly took a small sip. She coughed, but then drank again, a little more eagerly this time. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now. My name is Ethan. What's yours?" She didn't answer. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. He tried again, speaking more slowly. "What's your name, little one?" She looked at him, her gaze clear for a moment, and then the fever seemed to take her again. Her eyes rolled back, and she slipped back into unconsciousness. Ethan sighed, a heavy, tired sound. He needed to get her to Harmony Creek. He couldn't risk leaving her alone while he rode for a doctor. He had to take her with him. He was just about to find a clean blanket to wrap her in for the journey when he heard a noise outside. The sound of hoofbeats, a small group of riders approaching the ranch at a steady clip. His hand instinctively went to the holster at his hip. He wasn't expecting anyone, especially not in the middle of a drought that had everyone too focused on their own problems. He put his hand on his revolver, a well-worn Colt Peacemaker, and stepped to the window, peering out cautiously. 3 men, all well-armed and looking menacing, were dismounting at his corral. Their leader was a burly man with a thick, dark beard and a scar that bisected his left eyebrow. He looked familiar, a face he'd seen in town a few times but couldn't place. The man's eyes, even from a distance, were hard and cold. He was looking around the ranch, his gaze sweeping over the dusty ground, the bunkhouse, and finally, the main cabin. Ethan's blood ran cold. He pulled back from the window, his mind racing. Who were they? What did they want? He looked at the little girl on his cot, her small, vulnerable form. A terrible, chilling thought took root in his mind. Were they looking for her? Could that be why she was left under that stone? He had a choice. He could wait, see what they wanted and risk her being discovered, or he could try to hide her. He knew the bunkhouse was a better place for her. It was rarely used and had a small secret cellar beneath the floorboards, a hidden space his father had built long ago to store valuables. It was his only chance. He scooped her up, holding her close, and crept out the back door of the cabin, heading towards the bunkhouse. The men were shouting now, their voices rough and demanding. "Ethan Thorne! We know you're in there." He reached the bunkhouse, his heart hammering against his ribs. He pushed the door open, stepped inside, and carefully placed the girl on a bunk. He knelt, lifted a loose floorboard, and saw the small, dark space below. It was dusty and smelled of damp earth, but it was a perfect hiding spot. He gently lowered her into the hole, pulling the blanket over her. "Shh," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "Don't make a sound. I'll be back for you. I promise." He replaced the floorboard just as the men's heavy footsteps reached the cabin door. He knew he had to stall them, to keep them away from the bunkhouse. He had to protect her. He took a deep breath, his hand on the hilt of his revolver, and walked out to face the three men who stood in his front yard. The drought-stricken land, the desperate search for water, all of it faded into the background. His world had narrowed to one simple, terrifying truth. He was a guardian now, and he was about to face a deadly foe. The stakes were higher than they'd ever been. The moment Ethan stepped out of the cabin, the tension was a palpable thing, thick as the dust-choked air. The leader of the group, a man with a sneering mouth and a cold glint in his eye, took a step forward. He was a brute of a man, built like a brick wall, with a well-worn revolver holstered at his hip. "Thorne," he grunted, his voice a low rumble. "We heard you found something out near the mesa, something valuable." Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs, but his face remained a mask of calm. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice steady. "All I found out there was more dirt and more dry ground." The man's grin widened, revealing a set of stained teeth. "Don't play coy, rancher. We know you went looking for the old man's spring. We know you moved that rock." He gestured to the two men behind him, who flanked him like a pair of dangerous shadows. "We've been looking for that little girl for weeks. A reward has been put out for her return, a hefty one at that." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. A reward. The little girl wasn't just abandoned, she was being hunted. He realized the scar on her face, the way she was left to die under that stone. All pointed to a deliberate, violent act. He gripped the handle of his revolver, his knuckles white. "I don't know any little girl. You've got the wrong ranch." "Don't lie to me," the leader snarled, taking another step closer. "We saw the child's footprints near the rock. We followed the trail. It leads right here, Thorne. You can give her back, take the reward, and we all walk away happy." Ethan's mind raced, a frantic search for a way out. He was outnumbered and outgunned. The three men were all seasoned, and their intentions were clear. He couldn't risk a fight, not with Clara hidden just yards away, vulnerable and helpless. He had to bluff. He had to buy time. "What makes you think she's here?" he said, his voice laced with a bravado he didn't feel. "Maybe she went another way. Maybe the tracks got mixed up." The leader let out a short, humorless laugh. "We're not fools, Thorne. We know our business. Now, where is she?" Ethan slowly raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, his expression weary. All right, I'll admit it. I found her, but I already took her to Harmony Creek. She was in a bad way. I left her with the doc." It was a bold lie, a risky gamble. The leader's eyes narrowed, a flicker of suspicion in his gaze. "The doctor, why would you do that? The reward is for her return to us, not to some small-town sawbones." "I was worried she wouldn't make it," Ethan said, letting a touch of concern enter his voice. "She was running a high fever. I figured the reward would be no good if she died." The man looked at his companions, a silent debate passing between them. They were looking for a prize, a bounty, A sick child was a liability. The leader's gaze hardened again as he turned back to Ethan. "When did you take her?" "This morning, before sunup." Ethan lied smoothly. "I rode hard. She's with the doc now." The leader's eyes swept over the ranch, his gaze lingering on the bunkhouse for a fraction of a second. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Had he seen something? Had the little girl made a sound? No, the bunkhouse was silent. He had to keep them talking. "Look, if you want the reward, you'd better get to Harmony Creek. The doc will probably want some payment for his services," Ethan said, a dry tone in his voice. The leader seemed to be considering it. The story, while a bit thin, made sense. A sick child was a burden, and a rancher would naturally seek medical help, and the promise of a reward was a powerful motivator. "All right, Thorne," the man said, a sneer still on his face. "We'll check it out, but if you're lying to us, if we find out she's here, we'll be back, and it won't be just the three of us." With that chilling warning, the men mounted their horses and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Ethan stood there, frozen, until the sound of their hoofbeats faded into the oppressive silence. He let out a long, shaky breath, the tension leaving his body in a sudden rush. He had managed to buy a little time, but he knew they would be back. They would find out he had lied, and they would be even angrier. He had to get Clara to safety, far away from here. He rushed to the bunkhouse, his hands trembling as he lifted the floorboard. He peered into the small, dark space. The little girl was still there, curled into a tight ball, her eyes wide with a fear that seemed to have been present for a long, long time. He carefully lifted her out, cradling her in his arms. She was so small, so trusting, even after all she had been through. He felt a fierce protective instinct swell in his chest. "They're gone, little one," he whispered. "You're safe for now." He carried her back to the cabin. The immediate danger was gone, but he knew this was just the beginning. He didn't know who these men were, or why they were hunting a small child, but he knew he couldn't let them have her. He looked at her pale, fevered face and made a silent promise. He would protect her, no matter the cost. His life had changed, not because of a drought or a foolish myth, but because of a small, frightened girl who needed a hero, and whether he was ready for it or not, he had just become one. The afternoon sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and red. But for Ethan, the day was far from over. With the immediate threat gone, he focused on the little girl, who was now awake and staring at him with wide, solemn green eyes. The fear was still there, a thin layer over a profound exhaustion. She hadn't spoken a word, and her silence was more unnerving than any crying fit could have been. He managed to get her to drink a little more water, and then, with slow, careful movements, he gave her some weak broth he'd made from a few dried vegetables he had left. She ate with a quiet desperation, as if she hadn't had a proper meal in days. He watched her, a mix of pity and concern twisting in his gut. This was a new, frightening kind of responsibility. He was a rancher, not a father. His life was built around routine and solitude, broken only by the hard work of the land. Now his world had a small, silent passenger. He tried to talk to her again, to get her to tell him her name or where she came from. "You're safe here, little one," he said, his voice soft and low. "My name's Ethan. What should I call you?" She just looked at him, her gaze unwavering. There was a raw, primal fear in her eyes, a kind of terror that went beyond her present situation. It was a fear that suggested a history of violence and trauma. Ethan knew he couldn't push her. He would have to wait. He thought of the name he had given her in his head, a simple, quiet name that felt right. "Clara," he whispered. "I'll call you Clara." He knew he couldn't stay on the ranch. It was only a matter of time before the men from before discovered his lie and returned, likely with more men. He had to get her to a safe place, a place far from here. But where? Harmony Creek was out of the question now. He had lied about going there. Any direction he chose was a risk. He had to think, to plan. He spent the rest of the evening gathering supplies. He packed 2 canteens of water, what little food he had left, dried meat and hardtack biscuits, and a couple of blankets. He checked his rifle, a reliable Winchester, and made sure he had enough ammunition. He even found a small faded rag doll tucked away in an old chest, a remnant of his own childhood. He gave it to Clara, who clutched it to her chest, the first flicker of emotion, a hint of comfort, crossing her face. He decided they would travel north, away from the familiar paths. The terrain would be rough, but it was their best chance of avoiding anyone. He would ride through the night, using the cover of darkness to put as much distance between them and the ranch as possible. As night fell, a cool breeze swept through the valley, offering a brief respite from the day's heat. Ethan sat by the fire, watching Clara as she slept, curled up on the cot with the rag doll held tight. He was a man of action, of simple, clear choices, but this was different. Every decision he made now had the weight of her life on it. He thought of his life before today, the endless cycle of work, the struggle against the land, the solitude he had grown to accept. Now it all seemed so simple, so trivial. He was a different man now, a guardian, a protector. The stars, a brilliant tapestry of light, began to appear in the inky blackness of the sky. Ethan looked up at them, feeling a profound sense of isolation and purpose. He had no idea what he was getting himself into. He didn't know the men who were hunting her, didn't know her story, and he was risking everything he had. But looking at her, a tiny, helpless bundle of humanity, he knew he had no other choice. Around midnight, he gently woke her. "Clara," he whispered, "it's time to go." She stirred, her eyes wide with confusion. He helped her up, wrapped her in a blanket and carried her out to Whisper. He mounted the horse, carefully settling her in front of him, her small body pressed against his chest. He held the reins with one hand, his other arm wrapped securely around her. She didn't resist, her trust in him absolute and heartbreaking. He turned Whisper to the north, away from the lights of Harmony Creek, away from the familiar, safe world he knew. The journey was slow and deliberate. The moon cast long, eerie shadows on the landscape, turning familiar rock formations into strange, monstrous shapes. The night was alive with the sounds of the desert, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of a snake in the brush, the mournful cry of a coyote. Clara slept most of the way, her breathing a soft, steady rhythm against his chest. Ethan rode on, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and fears. He was a man on the run, a stranger with a silent child, heading into the vast unknown. He had no plan, no destination, just a desperate need to keep her safe. The drought still held his ranch in its cruel grip, but now a new, more immediate kind of survival was at stake. He had to be strong for her, for the little girl who had appeared from beneath a rock, a silent, powerful reminder that even in the most desolate places, hope could be found. The first light of dawn found Ethan and Clara deep in the unforgiving terrain of the mesa. The landscape was a desolate lunar expanse of scrub brush, cacti, and jagged rocks. Ethan's muscles ached from hours in the saddle, and a fine layer of dust coated his face and clothes. He stopped Whisper at the mouth of a small canyon, a narrow crevice in the earth that offered some shade from the relentless sun. He dismounted, his legs wobbly, and carefully lifted Clara from the saddle. She was still asleep, her head nestled against his chest. He laid her down in the cool, sandy shade of a rock overhang. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at him, the fear a little less pronounced now, replaced by a deep, weary trust. He found a small, clean spot and poured some of his precious water onto a cloth, which he used to wipe her face and hands. He gave her a piece of hardtack and a sip of water from his canteen. She ate and drank in silence, her small movements deliberate and focused. He watched her, a profound sense of protectiveness growing in his chest. She was a quiet, resilient little thing, her silence a shield against a world that had clearly hurt her. He knew he couldn't stay here long. They had to keep moving. He needed a plan, a destination. He thought of a friend, an old prospector named Silas, who lived a few days' ride away in a remote, hidden valley. Silas was a solitary man, but kind-hearted. His cabin was a sanctuary, a place where no one would think to look for them. It was a risky journey, but it was their only viable option. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became suffocating. Ethan scanned the horizon, his eyes sharp and practiced. He was constantly on edge, his senses heightened, listening for the telltale sounds of approaching riders. The men who had come to his ranch were likely halfway to Harmony Creek by now, ready to find out he had lied. They would be back, and they would be angry. He had to be ready for them. He helped Clara to her feet. "We have to go, little one," he said softly. "The sun's getting hot." She didn't question him. She simply took his hand, her small fingers curling around his. It was a gesture of trust so profound, it brought a lump to his throat. He led her deeper into the canyon, the narrow walls offering a temporary shield from the open expanse of the mesa. They walked for a couple of hours, the heat beating down on them, the silence broken only by their footsteps and the occasional rustle of a lizard. Clara walked without complaint, her little legs moving with surprising endurance. Ethan was beginning to see that her quietness was not just fear, but a deep well of resilience. He had to be careful. He had to conserve their supplies. Every sip of water, every bite of food was a calculated risk. He was keenly aware of the weight of her life on his shoulders. He was responsible for her now. He had found her, and in doing so, he had become her only hope. As they walked, he found himself talking to her, telling her stories about his life on the ranch, about his father, about the different kinds of plants and animals they passed. She listened intently, her green eyes fixed on him, as if absorbing every word. Her silence was not a void, but a quiet, patient presence. "That's a saguaro cactus," he said, pointing to a towering plant that stood like a silent sentinel. "Some folks say they're like old men, watching over the desert. They can live for hundreds of years." Clara looked at the cactus, then back at him. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of her lips. It was the first sign of emotion he had seen from her, a tiny crack in the shell of her fear, a small, precious victory. They found a small hidden spring in a rocky crevice, a tiny trickle of water that was a true godsend. Ethan filled his canteens and Clara knelt to drink, her hands cupped as if in prayer. The water was cool and refreshing. It was a sign of hope, a small beacon in the desolate landscape. He knew the path ahead was fraught with danger. They were in uncharted territory, away from the familiar trails. But with every step, he felt a strange sense of purpose. He wasn't just a man running from a problem. He was a man running towards a solution, a man fighting for something more important than his own survival. As the sun began to set, he found a small cave, just large enough for them to rest for the night. He made a small fire, the flames casting flickering shadows on the walls. He sat with Clara, the rag doll still clutched in her hand. He had found a lost child, and in doing so had found a part of himself he didn't know existed. He was no longer just Ethan Thorne, the rancher. He was a guardian, a protector, a man with a new purpose, and for the first time in a long time he felt a sense of clarity, a sense of rightness that had nothing to do with the land and everything to do with the small quiet life he held in his hands. The journey continued, a grueling, dusty trek through the unforgiving landscape. Ethan and Clara moved like shadows, traveling mostly at night and hiding during the sweltering heat of the day. They had to be careful, as the land was not only their enemy but also their shield. The silence of the desert was a double-edged sword. It made it easier to hear approaching danger, but also made them feel profoundly alone. Clara's resilience was a constant source of wonder to Ethan. She never complained, never cried, and followed his lead without question. Her silence had a powerful presence, a quiet strength that spoke volumes about what she had endured. He learned to read her small gestures, the way she would point to something she found interesting, the slight curve of her lips when he told a story. She was slowly, carefully, opening up. One morning, just as the sun was beginning to peak over the horizon, they were resting near a small cluster of boulders. Ethan was watching the sunrise, his rifle resting across his lap, when he heard it. The sound of hoofbeats, a small group approaching from the south. He instinctively grabbed Clara and pulled her behind a large rock, her small body pressed against his. "Shh," he whispered, his voice low. "Don't make a sound." He peered through a gap in the rocks, his heart pounding. It wasn't the 3 men from his ranch. These were different riders. 4 of them, their forms silhouetted against the rising sun. As they drew closer, he could make out their distinctive long coats and the star-shaped badges pinned to their chests. They were lawmen, a small posse of U.S. Marshals. A wave of relief washed over him, quickly followed by a cold dread. The law. He was technically a man on the run, a fugitive with a stolen child. He had no way to explain his actions without revealing Clara's location and putting her in danger. He had to stay hidden. The marshals were riding slowly, their eyes scanning the landscape. Their leader, a tall, imposing man with a hawk-like nose, looked weary, but his gaze was sharp and methodical. They were clearly looking for something or someone. Ethan's blood ran cold. Was it possible they were looking for him? Or for Clara? He held Clara close, his hand covering her mouth, just in case she made a sound. She was still, her eyes wide and intelligent, watching the riders with a profound stillness that belied her age. She seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, her small body a bundle of tense silence. The marshals stopped just 100 yards away, their horses snorting and stamping their hooves. The leader pulled a folded paper from his saddlebag and showed it to his men. It was a wanted poster. Ethan couldn't make out the details, but he knew with a terrifying certainty that it was likely for Clara, or for him. "You sure this is the way, Marshal?" one of the deputies asked, his voice a low drawl. "The bounty hunter swore he saw the kids' tracks heading this way," the leader said, his voice gruff. "He said a rancher named Thorne took her, but the trail goes cold here. It's like they disappeared into thin air." The word bounty hunter sent a chill down Ethan's spine. The men who had come to his ranch were bounty hunters, and they were likely the ones who had put out the wanted poster and then gone to the lawmen. He had been right to assume they would find out he lied. Now he was a wanted man. "Maybe they doubled back, Marshal," another deputy suggested. "No," the marshal said, his gaze sweeping over the horizon. "He's not a fool. He'd know we'd check the main roads. He's somewhere in these hills, I can feel it." Ethan held his breath, his heart pounding in his ears. He was so close to them, just a few feet away. He could feel the heat radiating from their horses, the tension in the air. He had to remain absolutely still, absolutely silent. The marshal turned his horse, his eyes still scanning the area, then looked directly at the cluster of boulders where Ethan and Clara were hiding. For a heart-stopping moment, Ethan thought they had been discovered. The marshal's gaze lingered, and then, with a shake of his head, he turned away. "Let's move on," he said. "We'll head to the river and see if they made it that far." The four men rode away, their forms shrinking in the distance until they were just specks against the horizon. Ethan waited for a long time, his body tense until he was sure they were gone. He let out a long, shaky breath, the tension leaving him in a sudden rush. He was safe for now, but he was no closer to a solution. He was a wanted man, a fugitive, with a little girl who was now even more of a target. He looked at Clara. She was staring at him, her eyes filled with a kind of quiet admiration. She hadn't made a sound. She hadn't panicked. She had just trusted him. He pulled her into a hug, a silent, powerful gesture of his gratitude and his promise to keep her safe. "You're a brave little thing," he whispered into her hair. "We'll be okay." He knew they had to be more careful now. He had to change their route, find a way to get off the grid entirely. The law was now against him, and the men who were hunting her were relentless. He was a man with a secret, a protector with a purpose, and a new, more dangerous chapter of his journey had just begun. He had to keep moving, to keep running, to keep her safe from the shadows that were now closing in from every direction. The close call with the U.S. Marshals had changed everything. Ethan's careful, calculated progress had to be abandoned in favor of a more unpredictable path. He now moved with a heightened sense of paranoia, constantly scanning the horizon, his ears trained for the slightest sound of approaching riders. They traveled through the harshest parts of the land, using the cover of rugged canyons and hidden trails to evade both the law and the men who were after Clara. The journey was taking its toll, their supplies were dwindling, and both Ethan and Clara were growing thin. The exhaustion was a heavy cloak, but the fear was a powerful motivator. Ethan's mind was a constant whirlwind of plans and contingencies. He knew they couldn't keep running forever. They needed a safe haven, a place where they could rest and regroup. He thought again of Silas, the old prospector. His remote cabin was their only real hope. The path there was treacherous, but it was also a place no one would think to look. He decided to risk it. As they neared the region where Silas's cabin was rumored to be, the landscape began to change. The arid, dusty mesa gave way to rolling hills covered in juniper and pine trees. The air grew cooler, the scent of damp earth and pine needles a welcome change from the dust and heat. They were close. One afternoon, as they were making their way through a dense thicket of pines, they came upon a small, isolated stream. The sound of running water was a balm to their weary souls. Ethan dismounted and helped Clara down. She immediately knelt by the water, splashing her face and hands with a small, joyful gasp. She took a long, satisfying drink, and the look of pure bliss on her face was a reward in itself. As Ethan was filling their canteens, he heard a sound. Not a horse, but a low groan, followed by a grunt of pain. He froze, his hand on his revolver, his eyes scanning the surrounding trees. He saw a man half hidden by a large boulder leaning heavily against it, his hand pressed to his side. The man was older, his face a web of wrinkles and a grizzled beard. He was wearing old worn clothes and his horse was grazing a few feet away. It was Silas, but he was hurt. Ethan hesitated for a moment. He had to be careful. The old man could be a trap, but something in his gut told him otherwise. Silas looked exhausted and in genuine pain. He was alone. Ethan slowly walked towards him, his hands in the open. "Silas," he said, his voice low. The old man's head snapped up. His eyes, a sharp, intelligent blue, widened in surprise. "Ethan, what in the blazes are you doing way out here?" he grunted. "I could ask you the same," Ethan said, a small, tired smile touching his lips. "You look like you've been run over by a cattle drive." "Got into a bit of a scrape with a wild boar," Silas said, wincing as he moved his hand. "Got a bad gash, bleeding a bit." Ethan knelt beside him and gently pushed his hand away. The gash was deep, but it wasn't a death wound. It was festering, however, a sure sign of infection. Silas needed help, and he needed it fast. "You need to get that cleaned," Ethan said, his tone one of quiet authority. He glanced back at Clara, who was standing a few feet away, watching them with a silent, watchful intensity. "Who's the little lady?" Silas asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "This is Clara," Ethan said. "She's a long story." Silas looked from Clara to Ethan, a silent question in his eyes. He was a man who had seen a lot of the world, and he seemed to understand that Ethan wasn't just on a leisurely trip. He sensed the tension, the danger. "Well," Silas said, "a long story can wait. We need to get this wound cleaned. Got any supplies?" Ethan shook his head. "Not much." "Then we'll have to get back to my cabin," Silas said, pushing himself to his feet with a pained grunt. "It's not far. A few miles. I can walk. Just need to rest a minute." Ethan helped him up, a strong arm around the old man's shoulders. Silas leaned on him, his weight surprisingly heavy. They moved slowly, carefully, with Clara following quietly behind. The encounter with Silas was a stroke of luck, a chance at salvation. He was a friend, a sanctuary, a man who would ask no questions and offer no judgment. As they walked, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't alone anymore. He had a friend, a destination, a place where he could finally rest and think. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time in days he felt like they had a chance. The shadows of the past were still there, lurking in the distance, but for now they had found a small, safe pocket of light. Silas's cabin was a rustic marvel, a testament to a life lived off the land. Tucked away in a small verdant valley, it was made of rough-hewn logs, with a chimney that stood like a beacon against the backdrop of the pines. A small stream gurgled nearby, and the air was filled with the scent of wood smoke and a lingering, earthy aroma. It was a haven, a sanctuary in a world that had become a desolate, dangerous place. Ethan helped Silas inside, carefully laying him down on a bunk, made of rough-hewn wood and covered with a patchwork quilt. Clara, her curiosity overcoming her shyness, looked around the small cabin, her eyes taking in the details. The iron stove, the collection of tools hanging on the walls, the shelves filled with jars of preserved food. She was in a real home again, and a profound sense of relief seemed to settle over her. Ethan, a man of action, immediately set about tending to Silas's wound. He found a bottle of whiskey in a cabinet, which he used as a rudimentary antiseptic. Silas winced and groaned as Ethan cleaned the gash, but he didn't complain. He was a man of the West, a man who understood the value of stoicism in the face of pain. As Ethan worked, Silas watched him, his gaze perceptive and knowing. "She a handful?" he asked, a small smile playing on his lips. Ethan looked at Clara, who was now sitting quietly on the floor, looking at a wooden carved bird Silas had made. "She's quiet," Ethan said, a new kind of pride in his voice. "And she's a survivor." Silas nodded. "I can see that. Got the eyes of an old soul." He paused, a flicker of seriousness crossing his face. "Ethan, what's going on? You're not just out for a Sunday ride. There's a look in your eye I've only seen on men with a price on their head." Ethan finished wrapping the bandage, tying it tight. He looked at Silas, the man he had known and trusted for years. He knew he had to tell him the truth. He couldn't lie to him. "It's a long story, Silas," Ethan said, his voice low. "But the short of it is, I found her a few days ago, buried under a rock." He explained the drought, the search for water, the discovery of the little girl, and the subsequent arrival of the bounty hunters. He spoke of the lie he had told, the wanted poster, and the close call with the U.S. Marshals. Silas listened in silence, his expression grim. When Ethan was finished, the old man just shook his head. "So, you're a fugitive, and that little one is a mystery with a bounty on her head. What in the blazes did she do to deserve that?" "I don't know," Ethan said, his voice laced with frustration. "She hasn't said a word, but I know she's in danger. I saw the look on those men's faces. They weren't just looking for a reward. They were looking for something else, something personal." Silas was silent for a moment, his eyes on Clara, who was now carefully running her small hand over the carving of the bird. "Some secrets are heavy, Ethan," he said, "especially when they're attached to a life." "I can't let them have her, Silas," Ethan said, his voice firm. "I won't. I'd rather die." Silas looked at him, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Didn't think you would. You're a good man, Ethan Thorne. Too stubborn for your own good, but a good man." The old man sighed, a heavy, tired sound. "Well, you've got a safe place here for a while. We'll tend to my leg, and you two can rest up. No one knows about this valley. We'll be safe here. For a while, at least." Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude. Silas was an anchor in the storm, a beacon of kindness in a world that had turned cold and dangerous. He was a friend, a mentor, and now a co-conspirator. Over the next few days, they settled into a routine. Ethan tended to Silas's wound, which slowly began to heal. He taught Clara how to pan for gold in the stream, and the simple act of searching for the glittering specks brought a sense of childlike wonder to her silent world. She began to eat more, her cheeks gaining a little color. Her fear, while still present, was slowly being replaced by a sense of safety and trust. One evening, as they were sitting by the fire, the stars a brilliant tapestry above them, Clara pointed to the rag doll she still carried. She looked at Ethan, then at the doll, and then for the first time she spoke. Her voice was a soft, reedy whisper, barely audible over the crackling of the fire. "Her name is Lily," she said. Ethan froze, his heart leaping in his chest. He looked at Silas, who was watching them with a knowing smile. He knelt down, his eyes on Clara. "Lily?" he asked gently. "Your doll." Clara nodded. "Lily," and then, as if a dam had broken, she spoke again. "They took," she trailed off, a flicker of pain crossing her face. Ethan's mind raced. "They took what? Her parents? Her family?" He didn't push her. He knew this was a monumental step for her. She was starting to talk, to share her story. The secret, the heavy weight of her past, was beginning to lift. He looked at Silas, a new sense of purpose settling in his heart. He knew now that this wasn't just about hiding from a threat. It was about helping Clara heal, about giving her a new life, a new family, and he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his soul that he would do whatever it took to make sure she was safe, no matter the cost. The small, brave word Lily was a turning point. It was a crack in the wall of silence Clara had built, and from that moment on, a slow, painstaking process of healing began. She started speaking in fragments, her voice soft and hesitant, like a song long forgotten. She would point to a tool and say its name, or look at Silas and say, "Man." It was a slow trickle of words, but to Ethan and Silas, it was a deluge, a sign of hope. She slowly began to share pieces of her story, small, fragmented glimpses of a terrifying past. She talked about a big house, a bad man, and running. The details were hazy, a jumbled collection of a child's memories, but they painted a clear picture of a life of fear and a desperate escape. She never said the bad man's name or what he wanted, but the terror in her eyes when she spoke of him was a powerful indicator of his cruelty. Ethan and Silas listened with quiet patience, piecing together the puzzle. The bounty hunters, the lawmen, the wanted poster, it all made a chilling kind of sense. Clara wasn't just a lost child, she was a witness, a person with a secret that someone was willing to kill for. "They took," she would say, and then her words would dissolve into a frightened whisper. Ethan would always reassure her, tell her she didn't have to talk, that she was safe. But he knew the secret, whatever it was the key to her past, and the only way to ensure her future. One afternoon, as Ethan was teaching her how to whittle a small stick, she pointed to his gun, a well-worn Colt Peacemaker that was always holstered at his hip. "Bang," she said, a small, knowing look on her face. "Bad man." Ethan froze. "He had a gun?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded, her eyes wide. "Bang, lots of bang." Silas, who was sitting nearby, listened with a grim expression. "Sounds like he's a professional, Ethan." he said. Probably an outlaw or a lawman gone bad. He was looking for something, Ethan said, remembering the bounty hunter's words. He said she was valuable. What could she have seen? The question hung in the air, a heavy, unanswered mystery. They were in a safe place, but they were no closer to solving the riddle of Clara's past. A few days later, a storm rolled in, a fierce, torrential downpour that was both a blessing and a curse. The rain was a godsend for the parched land, a life-giving force that washed away the dust and brought a fresh, clean scent to the air. But it was also a dangerous thing. The sudden downpour caused a flash flood in the small stream, turning the placid water into a raging torrent. Ethan and Silas spent the evening reinforcing the cabin's foundation, ensuring it was safe from the floodwaters. Clara watched them, her small face serious. The storm seemed to have a profound effect on her. As the rain hammered against the roof, she began to talk more, her words more fluid, less hesitant. "The shiny," she said one night, her voice a little louder than a whisper. "The shiny was in the box. The bad man wanted the shiny." Ethan and Silas exchanged a look. "The shiny?" Ethan said, trying to keep his voice calm. "What was it, Clara? Gold? Jewels?" She shook her head. "No, not gold. Blue and green, like the sky, like the trees." Silas's eyes widened. "Sounds like gemstones, Ethan," he said, his voice low. "Precious stones. And if a man is willing to kill a child for them." The pieces of the puzzle were finally beginning to fit. Clara hadn't just witnessed a crime. She had seen the location of a fortune in precious stones likely hidden away, waiting to be found. The bounty hunters weren't just after a reward, they were after the treasure, and Clara was the only one who knew where it was. The next morning the storm had passed, leaving the world clean and renewed. The sun broke through the clouds and a faint rainbow arced across the sky. Ethan sat with Clara by the stream, watching the water flow, now a gentle, steady current. "The shiny was under the big rock?" he asked gently. Clara shook her head. "No," she said, her voice a little more confident. "The shiny was in the box. The box was in the cave with the face." "The cave with the face?" Ethan asked, his mind reeling. He had heard of such a place, a local legend about a cave with a strange humanoid rock formation at its entrance. It was a landmark, a place everyone knew about, but no one ever went to. It was said to be cursed. "The bad man, he took the box," Clara said, her voice trembling. "He hit." She stopped, her eyes filling with tears. Ethan pulled her into a hug, a wave of protectiveness so fierce it took his breath away. "It's okay, little one," he whispered. "You don't have to talk about it." But she had already said enough. The man who had left her to die under that rock was an outlaw, a man who had stolen a fortune in precious stones and then tried to silence the only witness. He had come back for the child, not for a reward, but to finish what he had started. Ethan looked at the world around him, at the quiet, peaceful valley. He had found a sanctuary, but he knew now that it was only temporary. The men who were hunting them were relentless, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. He was now a guardian of a far greater treasure than he had ever imagined, not just the life of a little girl, but the secret that could lead to a fortune. He had to decide what to do next. He couldn't keep running forever. He had to face them, to fight for Clara's life and her future, and to find a way to get her to a place where she would be truly safe, a place where the shadows of the past could never reach her. The revelation about the shiny in the cave hung over the small valley like a storm cloud. Ethan and Silas knew that Clara's fragmented memories were the key not just to her past, but to a fortune that could change everything. But with that knowledge came a new, heavier burden. They were no longer just protectors of a child. They were guardians of a secret that had already claimed lives and would likely claim more. Ethan sat by the stream, running a piece of quartz through his fingers, a distant look in his eyes. Clara, now much more comfortable and trusting, sat beside him, carefully arranging a row of smooth pebbles on a flat rock. The quiet of the valley, once a source of peace, now felt like a fragile bubble, a temporary shield against the storm brewing outside. "So a box of jewels," Silas said, hobbling over to join them, his legs still stiff but healing well. "In a cave. The cave with the face. I've heard the stories. Old Indian lore, said to be guarded by spirits. Sounds like something straight out of a dime novel." "The bounty hunters believe it's real," Ethan said, his voice grim. And they're not the kind of men to chase a ghost story. No, Silas agreed. They're chasing a fortune, and they think this little one is the map. Clara looked up, her eyes wide. Shiny, she whispered, pointing to the pebbles. Lots of shiny. Ethan put his arm around her. It's a secret, Clara. A very important secret, and we have to keep it safe, just like you. The realization sank in. The bad man was likely an outlaw, and he wasn't alone. He had others with him, men who were as ruthless as he was. They had probably found the cave, but couldn't find the box. Perhaps they had a map, but the location was in a riddle, a puzzle that only the person who had originally hidden it could solve. Or maybe, and this was the most terrifying thought, Clara's family had discovered the treasure, and the outlaw had been trying to steal it from them. He had killed her family and left her to die, thinking she was the only one who had seen him. The thought of going back to the mesa was a terrifying one. The terrain was dangerous. The law was looking for him, and the bounty hunters were relentless. But he knew, deep down, that the answer to her past and the key to her future lay back there. He couldn't keep running forever. Sooner or later, they would be found. We have to go back, Ethan said, his voice resolute. Silas looked at him, his expression one of a weary concern. Ethan, that's madness. You've got lawmen and cutthroats looking for you. Why risk it? Because we have to know, Ethan said. We have to find out what happened. We have to find out who that man is. Clara deserves to know. She deserves justice, and we can't keep her safe if we're always running. Silas sighed, a heavy, tired sound. You're a stubborn man, Ethan, just like your father. He always did the right thing, no matter how foolish it looked. This isn't about foolishness, Silas. This is about right and wrong. I know, Silas said, and a new glint of determination entered his eyes. And I'm coming with you. My leg's not much good for a long ride, but I can still hold a rifle. I'm not letting you go back alone. Ethan looked at his old friend, a lump of gratitude in his throat. Silas, you don't have to. Yes, I do, Silas said. We're in this together. And besides, I want to see what a fortune looks like. Never seen one myself. And I'll need some new whiskey. The decision was made. They would wait a few more days. Let Silas's leg heal completely. And then they would head back to the mesa. They would have to be careful, to be smart, and to be one step ahead of the men who were hunting them. Ethan spent the next few days preparing, cleaning his rifle, sharpening his knife, and teaching Clara a few simple hand signals for danger and quiet. She learned them with an alarming speed, as if her small mind was a sponge, soaking up every piece of information that could help her survive. He looked at her as she played, a small, fragile life in a vast, dangerous world. He had found her, a miracle in a desolate land. And now he had to be the miracle for her. He had to be her shield, her protector, her guide. He had to face the shadows of the past to give her a future. And he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his soul that he was ready. The journey back to the mesa was different from the escape. This time, they were not running from a threat, but walking towards it, with a new sense of purpose and a shared understanding of the risks. Silas, despite his age and the stiffness in his leg, was a steady and reliable presence. He knew the land, the hidden trails, and the best places to find water. He was a seasoned guide, and his calm demeanor was a great comfort to Ethan, who was wrestling with a newfound sense of responsibility. They traveled slowly, making sure Clara was comfortable and well-fed. The desert, which had once felt so hostile, now seemed a little less menacing. Ethan pointed out different plants and animals, and Clara, her shyness fading, would ask questions, her small voice a sound of pure joy in the vast silence. She was a different child now, her eyes filled with a new light, a new sense of hope. As they neared the familiar territory of the mesa, the tension returned. Ethan grew more vigilant, his hand never far from his revolver. He and Silas took turns keeping watch at night, their senses heightened, listening for the slightest sound of approaching riders. They were back in the lion's den, and they knew it. One evening, as they were camped in a rocky crevice, they heard a sound that chilled them to the bone, the familiar low rumble of thunder. A storm was brewing in the distance, a dark cloud on the horizon that promised a flash flood. It was the same kind of storm that had led Ethan to Clara in the first place, and it was a reminder of the dangerous, unpredictable nature of the land. "We have to move," Ethan said, his voice urgent. "A flash flood in these canyons can be deadly. They packed their gear quickly, and with Clara riding in front of Ethan, they headed for higher ground. The storm hit with a fury, the sky turning a deep, angry purple, and the rain came down in sheets, a cold, relentless force that soaked them to the bone. The ground became a muddy, treacherous mess, and the canyon walls began to echo with the sound of rushing water. They found a small, narrow ledge high above the canyon floor, a temporary sanctuary from the raging flood. The sound of the water was a deafening roar, a powerful, terrifying force of nature that reminded them of their own vulnerability. Clara, for the first time in days, was frightened, and she clung to Ethan, her small body trembling. "It's okay, little one," Ethan said, his voice a low, soothing murmur. "We're safe. The storm will pass." He held her close, a shield against the storm's fury. As he sat there in the howling wind and the torrential rain, he thought of the bad man and the bounty hunters. He wondered if they were out in this storm, if they were as exposed and vulnerable as he was. He felt a surge of resolve. He would not let them win. He would not let them hurt Clara. He would protect her no matter the cost. The storm raged for hours, and then, as suddenly as it had come, it began to subside. The thunder faded, the rain turned to a light drizzle, and the sky began to clear. A faint, ethereal glow of a full moon appeared in the inky blackness, a beautiful, powerful beacon of light. They spent the rest of the night on the ledge, huddled together for warmth. As dawn approached, the world was a different place. The air was clean and crisp, the earth smelled of damp soil and life, and the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. They were tired, wet, and hungry, but they were alive. As they made their way back down the canyon, they saw the aftermath of the storm. The canyon floor was a muddy mess of uprooted trees and displaced boulders. It was a stark reminder of the power of the land, a power that could be both a giver and a taker of life. They were close now, they could feel it. The sense of unease of being watched was a constant companion. They were back on familiar ground, but it was ground that held a terrifying secret. They had survived the storm, but they knew the real test was yet to come. They were heading for the cave with the face, a place that held the key to a fortune and a future, and they knew, with a certainty that settled deep in their souls, that they were walking into a trap. They reached the base of the Blackfoot Mesa, the same place where Ethan had found Clara. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and pine, a stark contrast to the parched, dusty land he had last seen. He led them to the cave with the face, a landmark so well known in the area that it was almost a myth. It was a massive rock formation, its entrance resembling a skull-like face, with two large, dark openings for eyes and a gaping mouth. It was a natural formation, but it had a strange, menacing quality, as if it was a silent, watchful guardian of something ancient and powerful. Ethan and Silas dismounted, their eyes scanning the area for any sign of a recent presence. They found nothing. No hoofprints, no campfire ashes, no discarded food wrappers. It was as if no one had been there since the storm. It was an unsettling silence. "You sure this is the place, Clara?" Ethan asked, his voice low. She nodded, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and recognition. "The face," she whispered, pointing to the entrance. "Bad man was here." They entered the cave, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The air inside was cool and damp, and it smelled of old rock and earth. The cave was not very deep, just a small hollowed-out space that ended in a solid wall of rock. There was nothing there. No box, no shiny, nothing but bare rock. A wave of profound disappointment washed over Ethan. "There's nothing here," he said, his voice laced with frustration. "He must have taken it. The bad man must have taken the box." Clara shook her head, her face a picture of confusion. She pointed to a small, jagged crack in the rock wall, a thin, almost imperceptible line. "In here," she said. "The bad man, he broke the rock." Ethan looked at the crack. It was small, but he could see that the rock around it had been recently chipped away. He took a pickaxe he had brought with him and began to chip away at the rock, his heart pounding in his chest. As he worked, a small hollowed-out space began to appear. It was not a natural formation, but a man-made one. It was a hiding place. He reached inside, and his fingers brushed against something hard and metallic. He pulled it out, and his breath caught in his throat. It was a small, ornate silver box, its surface etched with intricate carvings of animals and symbols. The box was locked, and the key was nowhere to be found. He took the key, Silas said, his voice a low whisper. He knew it would be too heavy to carry. He was coming back for it, but he must have been spooked or injured, and he hid it here to come back for it later. Ethan held the box in his hands. It was heavy, and it was the source of all their troubles. It was the reason a small innocent girl had been left to die. He felt a surge of anger, hot and fierce, at the man who had done this. He looked at Clara, who was watching him with a strange, solemn expression. He knew he couldn't open it. He didn't have a key, and he didn't want to risk breaking it. The contents of the box were not the most important thing. The most important thing was Clara. He had to keep her safe, and the box was the key to doing so. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice grim. "He's probably coming back for this. We need to go back to Silas's place. We can hide it there." Silas nodded, his eyes fixed on the box. "That's a good idea, Ethan, but we have to be careful. The men who came to your ranch, they're probably watching this place. We're going to have to be smart." They left the cave, the box safely tucked away in Ethan's saddlebag. They were no longer just running from a threat. They were carrying the very thing that the threat wanted. They were bait, a moving target, and they knew it. As they rode away from the mesa, Ethan looked back at the cave with the face. It stood there, a silent, menacing guardian, a reminder of the darkness that had brought them all to this point. He had found a treasure, a fortune in precious stones, but he knew the greatest treasure of all was the small, brave girl who was riding with him. He would protect her, no matter the cost. He would face the shadows of the past to give her a future, and he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his soul that his fight was far from over. The ride back to Silas's valley was a tense one. They moved with a new sense of urgency, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The silver box, safely tucked away in Ethan's saddlebag, felt like a ticking time bomb. They were carrying the very thing that had brought a storm of violence into their lives, and they knew they were a moving target. They were a few hours into the journey when Silas, who was riding a few yards ahead, raised a hand, a sign for them to stop. He dismounted and knelt on the ground, his eyes fixed on a set of fresh hoofprints. "Someone's been through here," he said, his voice low. "Just a few hours ago, heading in the same direction we are." Ethan's heart sank. "The bounty hunters?" "Maybe," Silas said. "Or maybe the man who left her, the man who wants the box." They followed the tracks, their senses heightened, their hands on their guns. The trail was clear and easy to follow. The rider was moving fast, not trying to hide his tracks. It was a bold, arrogant move, a sign of a man who was confident in his speed and his ability to outrun anyone. They followed the trail for a few miles, until it led them to a small abandoned homestead. The cabin was a rotting husk of wood, the windows shattered, the door hanging off its hinges. A single horse, a magnificent black stallion, was tied to a post. It was a strange place for a man to stop, a place with no water, no shelter. "It's a trap," Ethan said, his voice grim. "He's waiting for us." "Maybe," Silas said. "Or maybe he's injured. Maybe he had to stop." Ethan dismounted, his rifle in his hand. "Stay here with Clara, Silas. I'll go check it out." "No," Silas said. "We're in this together. And besides, I know a few tricks. I can get in without him knowing." Silas, a man who had spent a lifetime in the wild, was a master of stealth. He moved like a shadow, his movements silent and graceful despite his age. He circled the cabin, his eyes trained on the windows, his movements as fluid as a river. Ethan watched him, his heart in his throat. A few moments later, a small sound came from the cabin, the sound of a footstep, a creak of old wood, and then a low grunt of pain. Silas was inside. Ethan waited, his rifle ready. The silence stretched on, a long, agonizing minute. And then Silas's voice came from inside the cabin, low and urgent. "Ethan, get in here now!" Ethan rushed to the cabin, his heart pounding. He kicked the door open and rushed inside, his rifle aimed. The cabin was dark and dusty, the air thick with the scent of old wood and blood. And there on the floor was Silas, standing over a man who was lying on the floor, his hand pressed to his side, a dark stain of blood spreading across his shirt. It was the leader of the bounty hunters, the man who had come to Ethan's ranch. He was pale, his eyes wide with a mix of pain and fury. Silas was holding a knife to his throat, his hand steady, his eyes cold. "For you're a long way from home, bounty hunter," Silas said, his voice a low growl. "I found the trail," the man said, his voice a rasp. "The kid's trail." "And you found me," Silas said, a grim smile on his face. Now, where's your horse?" "He's outside," the man said, his eyes darting to the door. "He's not tied up." "I know," Silas said. "I found him. I cut the rope." Ethan looked at the man, his heart pounding. "Where are the others?" he asked. "Where are your men?" They're a day behind," the man said, his voice a weak whisper. "They're not far." Ethan looked at Silas. "He's not alone." "I know," Silas said. "But he's the only one who knows the trail, the only one who knows where we're headed. We have to keep him here or get rid of him." Ethan looked at the man. He was a ruthless, cold-blooded killer. He had left a child to die. He deserved no mercy. But Ethan was not a killer. He was a rancher, a guardian. He was a man of the land, not a man of violence. "We'll tie him up," Ethan said. "We'll leave him here. His men will find him. We'll have a few hours' head start." Silas nodded, a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. He had wanted to finish the man, but he respected Ethan's decision. They tied the man up, a crude knot around his hands and feet, and left him on the floor of the cabin. They then took the man's horse, a powerful, fast-looking stallion, and rode away, leaving the bounty hunter to his fate. As they rode, Ethan knew they had made a mistake. They should have finished him. He was a dangerous man, a man who would not rest until he had what he wanted. He had given them a few hours' head start, but he would be back, and he would be even more dangerous, more ruthless, more determined. He had a vendetta now, a personal grudge against them. And he would not rest until he had his revenge. The encounter with the bounty hunter had changed everything. Ethan and Silas knew they were no longer just running, they were being hunted. The man they had left tied up in the cabin would be back, and he would be angrier, more determined, and more dangerous than ever. They had to be smart. They had to be one step ahead of him. They rode through the night, pushing the horses to their limits. Clara, a silent and resilient presence in front of Ethan, was a constant reminder of the stakes. They were not just fighting for their own survival, they were fighting for hers. As dawn broke, they were a few miles from Silas's valley, and they could feel the exhaustion in their bones. The horses were tired and they were running on fumes. They needed to rest, but they couldn't. Not yet. They reached the entrance of the valley, a narrow, treacherous path that was almost impossible to find without a guide. They dismounted and led the horses through the thick brush, their movements careful and silent. They were close to safety, a place where they could finally rest, where they could finally be a little less afraid. They were a few hundred yards from the cabin when they heard a sound, the sound of hoofbeats, a small group approaching from the north. They were not from the direction they had come. They were from the opposite direction, from the way to Harmony Creek. "The lawmen," Silas whispered, his face grim. "They must have followed our trail from the river." Ethan's heart sank. He had lied to the lawmen, but he had hoped they would have given up the chase. They were relentless. He looked at the cabin, so close, yet so far away. He had to make a choice. He could go to the cabin and risk a confrontation with the law, or he could try to lead them away. "We have to go to the cabin," Ethan said. "We're not going to outrun them, not with Clara, not with the horses this tired. We have to face them." Silas nodded, his eyes filled with a grim determination. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they were in a place they knew, a place with a few good hiding spots. They would fight on their own terms. They moved to the cabin, their movements silent and quick. They put Clara in the small hidden cellar, a place where she would be safe. They then grabbed their rifles and waited. They were two men against a small posse of lawmen. The odds were against them, but they had to fight. The lawmen reached the valley, their horses snorting and stamping their hooves. Their leader, the same hawk-nosed marshal from before, dismounted and looked around, his eyes sharp and methodical. He saw the cabin, the horses tied outside. He knew they were there. "Ethan Thorne!" the marshal shouted, his voice a low growl. "We know you're in there. Come out with your hands up." Ethan stepped out of the cabin, his hands in the air. "Marshal," he said, his voice calm, "what can I do for you?" The marshal looked at him, his eyes cold. "You can give us the girl, Thorne. We know you have her." "I don't know what you're talking about," Ethan said. "I haven't seen any girl." The marshal laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Don't play coy, Thorne. We have a wanted poster with your name on it, for kidnapping and assaulting a U.S. Marshal." "I haven't assaulted anyone," Ethan said. "Our men found your friend tied up in an abandoned cabin," the marshal said. "He told us everything. He said you were holding a little girl, a witness to a murder, and that you were heading for a place you call The cave with the face. Ethan's blood ran cold. The man they had left behind had sold them out. He had given them everything. The location of the girl, the location of the cave, and the location of the man who was protecting her. They had walked right into a trap. "He's lying," Ethan said. "I don't know any of that." The marshal just smiled, a cold, predatory look on his face. "We know you're lying, Thorne. We have the box. We found it in the cave. A box of precious stones. A ransom for the girl. And now we have both. And the man who stole them." Ethan's mind reeled. They had the box. They had been to the cave. The man they had left behind. He had gone back to the cave and told the lawmen about the box. He had used the information to get a better deal for himself. "We'll take the girl, Thorne," the marshal said, "and we'll take you back to Harmony Creek to face the music." Ethan's mind raced. He had to do something. He had to protect Clara. He had to get her out of there. He had to fight. He looked at Silas, who was standing behind him, his rifle in his hand, his eyes filled with a grim determination. They would not surrender. They would fight for her. They would fight for her freedom, for her future. They would fight for her life, and they would not give up. The standoff was a tense and volatile thing, a moment suspended in time where two opposing forces, a man fighting for justice and a man fighting for a child's life, met head-on. The marshal, a man of the law, but a man who clearly had a personal stake in this, stood his ground, his hand on his revolver. His deputies, a ragtag group of men who looked more like hired guns than lawmen, were all holding their rifles, their eyes fixed on Ethan and Silas. "I'll ask one last time, Thorne," the marshal said, his voice a low growl. "Where is the girl?" "She's not here," Ethan said, his voice firm. "And I'm not going to tell you where she is, not for all the money in the world." The marshal's face darkened. "You're a fool, Thorne, a dead fool." The moment the marshal's hand went for his revolver, Ethan reacted. He drew his Colt Peacemaker and in a flash of motion fired a shot at the marshal's feet, a warning shot that sent a plume of dust into the air. The marshal's men, startled by the shot, all raised their rifles, their fingers on the triggers. "Nobody moves," Silas shouted, his rifle aimed at the marshal's head. "Or the marshal's a dead man." The standoff stretched on, a long, agonizing minute of silence and tension. The marshal, his eyes a cold, hard glint of fury, looked at Silas, then at Ethan. He was out of options. He was a lawman, but he was also a man who didn't want to die. He slowly raised his hands in the air, a gesture of surrender. "All right, Thorne," he said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "You win. For now." Ethan and Silas backed away, their guns aimed, their eyes never leaving the marshal and his men. They retreated to the cabin, where they could hold them off until dark. They had bought themselves a little time, but they knew it was only a matter of time before the marshal and his men regrouped and came back for them. They barricaded the door and the windows, their movements quick and practiced. They were now in a fortress, a small safe haven in the middle of a war. They had survived, but they had also become outlaws, men who had defied the law and were now on the run. Inside the cabin they could hear the marshal's men shouting, their voices a low, angry hum. They were surrounded. They were trapped. They had to think, to plan, to find a way out. "He's going to wait for us to come out," Silas said, his voice grim. "He'll try to starve us out or smoke us out." "We can't stay here," Ethan said. "We have to get out. We have to get Clara to safety." They looked at the cabin, at the small, narrow cellar where Clara was hiding. It was her only chance. They had to create a distraction, a diversion that would allow them to escape. Ethan looked at the small, narrow chimney. "I have an idea," he said, a glint of determination in his eyes. "It's a crazy idea, but it might just work." He told Silas his plan, a plan that involved using a few old sticks of dynamite he had found in the cabin. It was a risky plan, a plan that could get them all killed, but it was their only chance. As night fell, they put their plan into action. They lit the fuse, and with a low hissing sound they threw the dynamite stick out the window away from the cabin. The explosion was a thunderous roar, a deafening sound that echoed through the valley. The marshal's men, startled by the sound, all rushed towards the sound, their rifles raised, their minds focused on the explosion. It was their chance. Ethan and Silas rushed to the small, narrow cellar, where they carefully lifted Clara out. She was frightened, her small body trembling, but she was brave. They grabbed their rifles and ran out the back of the cabin, their movements silent and quick, their minds focused on escape. They ran towards the woods, their movements a blur in the darkness. They could hear the marshal's men shouting, their voices a low, angry hum. They were free, they had escaped, but they were still on the run, still hunted, still a target. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. They had to keep running, to keep fighting, to keep her safe. They had defied the law, and now their lives were on the line. And they knew, with a certainty that settled deep in their souls, that they had to find a way to end this. They ran through the dense forest, their movements silent, their minds focused on escape. They had to put as much distance as they could between themselves and the marshal's men. They were a small, vulnerable trio against a force of men who were well-armed and determined. They were a small, fragile light in a world of darkness, and they knew they had to be careful, to be smart, and to be one step ahead of them. They ran until they could run no more, until their lungs ached and their legs felt like lead. They found a small, hidden cave, a temporary sanctuary from the night and the danger that lurked outside. They huddled together for warmth, their bodies trembling from exhaustion and fear. "We can't keep running," Ethan said, his voice a low whisper. "We're going to get caught. We're going to get killed." "I know," Silas said, his voice grim. "But what else can we do? We're outlaws now. There's nowhere to run." Ethan's mind raced. They were trapped. They had defied the law, and now they were hunted by both the law and the men who wanted Clara. He had to think, to find a solution. He had to find a way to end this. "We have to go to Harmony Creek," he said, a glimmer of an idea forming in his mind. "We have to tell our side of the story. We have to tell the truth about Clara, about the bounty hunters, about the box. We have to expose them." Silas looked at him, his eyes wide. "Ethan, that's madness. They'll just throw you in jail, or hang you." "Maybe," Ethan said, "but it's our only chance. We can't keep running. We have to face them. We have to fight for her." The decision was made. They would go to Harmony Creek, a place they had been avoiding for weeks, and they would face the law head-on. They would tell their story, and they would hope that someone would listen. It was a desperate plan, a fool's errand, but it was their only hope. They rode through the night, their movements silent and quick. They reached the outskirts of Harmony Creek just as dawn was breaking, and the town was a peaceful, quiet place. The air was filled with the scent of wood smoke and freshly brewed coffee. It was a place of safety, a place of hope. They rode into the town, their hands on their guns, their eyes scanning the streets. They were outlaws now, men with a price on their head, and they knew they were a target. They rode to the marshal's office, a small, unassuming building with a sign that read, U.S. Marshal. Ethan dismounted, his heart pounding in his chest. "Silas, you stay here with Clara. If anything goes wrong, you get out of here. You run, you don't stop, you keep her safe. Promise me." Silas nodded, his eyes filled with a grim determination. "I promise, Ethan. But don't do anything foolish." Ethan walked into the marshal's office, his hands in the air. The office was empty, the air thick with the scent of old paper and dust. He waited, his heart pounding, his mind racing. He was a man with a story, a man with a secret, and he was ready to tell it. A few minutes later, the door opened, and a man walked in. He was a different marshal, an older, more seasoned man, with a kind face and a weary look in his eyes. He looked at Ethan, a man covered in dust and sweat, a man with a wild look in his eyes. "Can I help you, son?" the marshal asked, his voice low and calm. "I need to tell you something, Marshal," Ethan said, his voice a little shaky. "I need to tell you about a little girl, a fortune, and a man who is hunting her." The marshal listened, his eyes on Ethan. He listened to the story of a drought, a rock, a child, and a fortune. He listened to the story of a bounty hunter, a lie, and a chase. He listened to the story of a fire and a fight. He listened to the story of a man who had become a guardian. When Ethan was finished, the marshal was silent for a long moment. He looked at Ethan, a strange look of respect and a little pity in his eyes. "Son," he said, his voice a little shaky, "you've got a hell of a story." "I know," Ethan said, "but it's the truth, the whole truth." The marshal sighed, a heavy, tired sound. "I believe you, son," he said. "I've seen a lot of things in my life, and a man's heart tells you a lot about him. You're a good man, Ethan, a good man who's in a hell of a mess." He looked at Ethan, a glimmer of a plan in his eyes. "I'm going to help you," he said, "but we're going to have to be smart. We're going to have to work together. And we're going to have to be a step ahead of them, a step ahead of the marshal and his men, and a step ahead of the bounty hunters." Ethan felt a surge of hope. He wasn't alone. He had a new ally, a man of the law who was on his side. He had a chance. He had a chance to save Clara, to get justice for her, to get her a new life. And he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his soul that his fight was just beginning. He had a new ally, a new hope, and a new plan. He was no longer just a man on the run. He was a man on a mission, and he would not fail. Marshal Henderson, a man whose face was a map of years of hard-earned wisdom, listened to Ethan's story with a quiet intensity. He had seen a lot in his time in the West: gold-crazed men, brutal outlaws, and desperate people. He knew a genuine man when he saw one, and something in Ethan's exhausted honesty and the raw, protective instinct in his eyes told him this wasn't a tall tale. "The Marshal after you, I know him," Henderson said, leaning back in his chair. "Marshal Garrett. He's got a reputation for being ambitious, and for associating with men who aren't on the straight and narrow. He's likely in cahoots with those bounty hunters. He'll want a cut of that fortune." The revelation was a chilling confirmation of Ethan's worst fears. The law was corrupt, and he was no longer just fighting outlaws. He was fighting a system. "We have to stop them," Ethan said, his voice tight with resolve. "They're going to find Clara and they're going to hurt her, or worse." "I know," Henderson said, "but we can't go after them with guns blazing. We have to be smart. We have to outmaneuver them. I'm going to send out a message to the other marshals in the area. A simple message, just a few words. Marshal Garrett is out of his jurisdiction, and he's not to be trusted. It won't get them to stop, but it will put a question in their minds. It will make them hesitant. It will buy us a little time." The plan was simple, and it was a good one. It wouldn't end the chase, but it would slow it down. It would give them a chance to think, to plan, to find a way to end this. "What about the box?" Ethan asked. "The jewels? What do we do with them?" Henderson looked at him, his gaze perceptive. "The box is the key, son. It's what they're all after. It's the reason a little girl was left to die. We have to use it. We have to use it as bait. We have to set a trap that will catch them all." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. A trap, a final confrontation. It was a terrifying idea, but it was also a necessary one. They couldn't keep running. They had to face them. "We'll need help," Ethan said. "I can't do this alone." "You won't be alone," Henderson said, a small, knowing smile on his face. "I'll be with you, and I'll get a few good men from this town to help us, men who are not on the payroll of Marshal Garrett." Ethan felt a profound sense of relief. He had a plan, an ally, a purpose. He was no longer just a man on the run. He was a man with a mission. They went outside where Silas was waiting with Clara. Silas looked at Ethan, a question in his eyes. Ethan just nodded, a small, knowing smile on his face. Silas understood. They had a new plan. They had a new hope. Henderson looked at Clara, his gaze gentle and kind. He knelt down, and with a soft, reassuring voice he spoke to her. "You're a brave little girl, Clara," he said, "and you're going to be safe. I promise." Clara looked at him, her eyes wide, and for the first time she smiled a full, genuine smile. It was a small, beautiful thing, a sign of hope, a sign of trust. It was a sign that they were on the right path. The plan was set. They would travel to a remote, abandoned mine, a place where they could set a trap. They would use the box as bait, and they would wait. They would wait for Marshal Garrett and his men, and they would wait for the bounty hunters. They would face them all, and they would end this. They would fight for Clara's future, for her freedom, for her life, and they would not fail. They would not give up. They would fight until they won. The journey to the abandoned mine was a tense and nerve-wracking one. They were a small, diverse group. Ethan, the reluctant guardian, Silas, the grizzled old prospector, and Marshal Henderson, a man of the law who was now a renegade. They were all united by a common purpose: to protect a small, innocent girl and to bring a group of corrupt lawmen and bounty hunters to justice. They reached the mine, a dark, gaping maw in the side of a mountain, surrounded by a desolate landscape of rock and scrub brush. It was a perfect place for a trap, a place where there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. They set up their ambush, their movements quick and practiced. They hid in the shadows, their rifles ready, their hearts pounding in their chests. They placed the silver box, a small gleaming beacon of light, in the middle of the mine's entrance. A silent, powerful piece of bait. They were ready. They were waiting. They were a small, determined force against a group of men who were driven by greed and a lust for power. They didn't have to wait long. A few hours later, they heard them. The sound of hoofbeats, a small group of riders approaching from the north. Marshal Garrett and his men. They dismounted and looked around, their eyes scanning the area. They saw the box, and their faces lit up with a look of greed and triumph. They had found the treasure. They moved to the mine, their movements confident and arrogant. They had no idea they were walking into a trap. They walked into the mine, their eyes fixed on the box, and then a voice rang out. "Freeze!" Marshal Henderson's voice echoed through the mine. "Hands up, it's over, Garrett!" Marshal Garrett and his men, startled by the voice, all turned, their hands on their guns. They looked at Henderson, a man they thought was on their side, and their faces were a mask of confusion and rage. "Henderson," Garrett said, his voice a low growl. "What the hell is this?" "This is justice, Garrett," Henderson said, his voice firm. "And you're all under arrest." Garrett's face darkened. "You're a fool, Henderson. You think you can stop me? You think you can stop us all?" "I think I can," Henderson said, "and I'll be damned if I let you get away with this. You hurt a little girl, Garrett. You tried to kill her, and for that, there is no forgiveness." Garrett's men, hearing the words, looked at Garrett, a flicker of doubt in their eyes. They were outlaws, but they were not killers of children. Garrett, seeing the doubt, knew he had to act. He drew his revolver, and in a flash of motion, fired a shot at Henderson. The shot was a thunderous roar, a deafening sound that echoed through the mine. Henderson, a man of quick reflexes, dived for cover, the bullet whizzing past his head. And then all hell broke loose. The sound of gunshots filled the air, a cacophony of violence and chaos. Ethan, Silas, and Henderson's men all returned fire, their movements quick and precise. They were fighting for their lives, fighting for justice, fighting for Clara. The fight was a brutal, chaotic thing, a moment of pure, unadulterated violence. But in the end, justice prevailed. Garrett and his men were all killed, their bodies lying in a bloody heap on the floor of the mine. Ethan and his men, all bruised and battered, were all alive. They had won. They had fought, and they had won. Ethan looked at the bodies of the men who had been hunting them for weeks, and a profound sense of relief washed over him. It was over. The chase was over. The fight was over. The war was over. He walked to the silver box, and with a careful hand he picked it up. It was heavy, and it was a symbol of all the pain and suffering that had been brought into their lives. He looked at Clara, who was watching him from a distance, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and triumph. He walked to her, and with a gentle hand, he knelt down. He looked at her, and in her eyes, he saw a future of peace, a future of safety, a future of hope. He had found a treasure, a fortune, but he knew the greatest treasure of all was the small, brave girl who had survived it all. He had fought for her, he had risked his life for her, and in doing so, he had found his purpose. He was no longer just a rancher. He was a guardian, a protector, a hero. He had found his destiny, and it was a destiny that was worth more than all the gold in the world. He had found his family, and he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that he would never let her go. The aftermath of the firefight was a chilling, quiet thing. The silence, once a source of comfort, now held the heavy weight of what had transpired. The bodies of Marshal Garrett and his men lay still, a grim testament to the violence that had been unleashed. The air, once filled with the scent of pine and earth, now carried the metallic tang of blood and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Marshal Henderson, a man of quiet authority, took charge. He and his men, all good, honest men from Harmony Creek, worked to secure the scene. They searched the bodies, collecting their weapons and any papers they had on them. The silver box, the source of all the trouble, was carefully examined. It was heavy and it was locked. They had won the battle, but the treasure was still a mystery. Ethan, a man who had been running on fumes for weeks, felt a profound sense of exhaustion and relief. He was a hero, a man who had fought for a child's life, but he was also a man who had taken lives. The weight of his actions, a heavy, silent burden, settled on his shoulders. He looked at Clara, who was standing a few feet away, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe. She had seen the violence, the chaos, the death. He had to be strong for her. He had to show her that this was not a moment of triumph, but a moment of justice. "It's over, little one," he said, his voice a low, soothing murmur. "You're safe now. They can't hurt you anymore." Clara looked at him, and for the first time, she did something he had never seen her do. She began to cry. Not a cry of fear or pain, but a cry of relief, a cry of sorrow, a cry of a child who had been through too much. He knelt down and pulled her into a hug, a tight, powerful embrace that was a silent promise of his love and his protection. Marshall Henderson, a man who had a heart of gold, watched them, a small knowing smile on his face. He knew that this was not just a case of a lawman bringing a group of outlaws to justice. This was a story of a man who had found his purpose in a world of chaos. "We'll need to go back to Harmony Creek, Ethan," Henderson said, his voice low. "We'll need to report this, and we'll need to get the girl to a safe place, a place where she can rest and heal." The journey back was a different one. They were no longer running. They were riding towards a new beginning, a new life, a new purpose. The air, once filled with the tension of the chase, was now filled with a sense of peace, a sense of hope. As they rode, Ethan looked at Clara, who was now sleeping in his arms, her head resting on his chest, her small body a bundle of peace and trust. He had found her under a rock, a child who had been left for dead. He had fought for her. He had risked his life for her, and in doing so, he had found his destiny. He was no longer just a rancher. He was a guardian, a protector, a hero. He had found his family. Back in Harmony Creek, the town was a different place. The people, who had been living in fear of the drought and the outlaws, were now filled with a sense of relief, a sense of hope. Marshall Henderson, a man who had done his duty, was a hero, and Ethan, the man who had been a fugitive, was now a man of honor. The marshal's office was a place of a new beginning. Henderson took the silver box, a small, unassuming thing that had caused so much pain and suffering, and placed it on his desk. He looked at Ethan, and a new plan, a new purpose formed in his eyes. "Ethan," he said, his voice low, "I've been a marshal for 30 years. I've seen a lot of things, and I've never seen a man who would fight for a child like you did. You're a good man who deserves a new life, a new beginning." "I don't know what to do, Marshal," Ethan said, his voice a little shaky. "I don't know what comes next." "I know," Henderson said, "but you'll figure it out, and I'll be here to help you, and I'll make sure that little girl gets a chance at a new life, a life of peace, a life of happiness, a life of hope." Ethan looked at Clara, who was now playing with a small wooden horse he had given her. She was a different child now, a child who was no longer haunted by a past of fear and violence. She was a child who was looking forward to a future of peace and happiness, and Ethan, the man who had found her, knew that he had found his purpose. He had found his family, and he would never let them go. He would fight for her, he would protect her, and he would give her a new beginning in a world of peace and hope. The town of Harmony Creek, once a place of quiet desperation, was now a small haven of peace. News of the shootout at the abandoned mine spread like wildfire, painting Ethan and Marshall Henderson as heroes. The defeat of Marshall Garrett's corrupt posse and the bounty hunters was a victory not just for them, but for the entire community. The air, once heavy with tension, was now filled with a fragile but growing sense of hope. Ethan, however, was not celebrating. The weight of the past few weeks, the violence he had witnessed and participated in, sat heavily on him. He found a quiet corner in a saloon, a place where he could sit and think. The barman, a kind-hearted man with a weary look, brought him a cup of coffee without being asked. "Heard what you did, Thorne," the barman said, his voice low. "You did right by that little girl. You did what the law should have done." Ethan just nodded, his gaze fixed on the steam rising from his cup. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who had done what he had to do. He had protected a child. But the cost of that protection, the lives he had taken, was a heavy burden to bear. Marshall Henderson, a man who seemed to have a sixth sense for a troubled soul, found him there. He sat down across from him, his face a mask of quiet concern. "You're a good man, Ethan," Henderson said, "and you did what you had to do. Don't let the shadows of the past haunt you. You gave that little girl a future, that's all that matters." "I know," Ethan said, his voice a low whisper, "but I still have to figure out what comes next. For me, for her." "I know," Henderson said. "And I have an idea. We have the box. We have the key to her past. It's time to open it." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The silver box, the source of all their troubles. It was a terrifying thing, but it was also a key to her past, a key to her future. He knew he had to open it. He had to know what was inside. He had to know what had caused so much pain and suffering. They walked back to the marshal's office, a place that now felt like a second home. The box sat on the desk, a small, unassuming thing that held a great secret. Silas was there, his face a picture of curiosity. He was as eager as Ethan to know what was inside. "I found this in Garrett's saddlebag," Henderson said, holding up a small, ornate silver key. It was a perfect match for the keyhole on the box. Ethan took the key, his hands trembling. He inserted it into the keyhole, and with a soft, metallic click, the box opened. They all leaned in, their eyes fixed on the contents. It wasn't a box of jewels. It was a box of papers, old, yellowed, and carefully folded. They were a jumbled collection of letters, deeds, and a single small photograph. Ethan carefully unfolded a letter. It was a letter from a man to his sister, a letter filled with love and hope, a letter from a man who had found a new life, a new purpose, a letter from a man who had found a new home. The letters told a story, the story of a family who had fled the war in the East, a family who had come to the West to find a new life, a family who had found a small, fertile valley and had made it their home. They were a family who had found a vein of precious stones, a fortune that had made them rich beyond their wildest dreams. But the letters also told a story of a rival, a man who had followed them, a man who had found them, a man who had tried to steal their fortune. The man was a brutal, ruthless killer, a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. The letters told the story of a man who had decided to hide his family's fortune, a man who had decided to keep it a secret. He had hidden it in a place that only he knew, a place that was a secret from the world. And then Ethan saw it. The photograph. It was a picture of a man and a woman who were smiling, their eyes filled with love and hope, and in the woman's arms was a small, smiling child. The child was Clara. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. It was a picture of Clara and her parents. They were a family. They were a family who had been killed, a family who had been hunted, a family who had been torn apart by a man who wanted a fortune. Her parents, Silas said, his voice a low whisper. They were killed. Ethan looked at the letters, at the photograph, at the small empty box. He had found a treasure, a fortune, but he knew the greatest treasure of all was the small, brave girl who was a testament to the love of her parents. She was a living legacy, a living reminder of a love that was stronger than greed, a love that was stronger than violence. "We have to find out who he was," Ethan said, his voice grim. "The man who killed them. We have to find him. We have to bring him to justice." "We will, Ethan," Henderson said. "We'll find him, and we'll bring him to justice. But for now, let's just be grateful for the small things that make life worth living. A new beginning, a new life, a new family. That's all that matters." Ethan looked at Clara, who was now holding the photograph, her small fingers tracing the faces of her parents. She was no longer a mystery. She was a child with a name, a family, a past. And he, the man who had found her, was now a man with a purpose, a man with a future. And he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his soul that his fight was far from over. He had a new purpose, a new mission, and a new family. The contents of the box had answered some questions, but they had also raised new ones. The letters from Clara's father, a man named Thomas, were a powerful emotional testament to his love for his family and his determination to protect them. They also painted a chilling portrait of a ruthless rival, a man who had followed them from the East, a man who had a personal vendetta against them. The letters referred to him only as the Serpent, a nickname that spoke of his cunning and cruelty. But the letters did not say where the fortune was hidden. They spoke of a riddle, a puzzle, a map to a treasure that was a secret from the world. Thomas had written that the fortune was hidden in a place that only a person with a pure heart could find. It was a strange, almost mythical riddle, but given the circumstances, it was also a real and dangerous one. Ethan, Silas, and Marshall Henderson pored over the letters, looking for any clue, any hint, any word that could unlock the riddle. They found nothing. The letters were a dead end. The fortune, the very thing that had caused so much pain and suffering, was still a mystery. "He was a smart man, Clara's father," Henderson said, his voice low. "He knew that if he wrote it down, it could be found. So he made it a riddle that only he and his wife knew the answer to." "What about Clara?" Ethan said. "Could she have seen something? Could she have heard something?" They all looked at Clara, who was now playing with her doll Lily. She was a child who had seen too much, a child who had been through too much. They couldn't ask her to remember a terrifying past. They couldn't ask her to solve a riddle. They had to protect her. "We'll have to figure it out ourselves," Silas said, a determined look on his face. "We'll find the serpent. And we'll find the treasure. We'll do it for Clara's parents. We'll do it for her." The decision was made. They would embark on a new mission. A mission to find a treasure. A mission to find a killer. A mission to get justice for a family that had been torn apart. They spent the next few days in Harmony Creek, a place that now felt like a second home. Ethan was a man of the people, a man who had fought for them, and they embraced him as one of their own. He was no longer a stranger. He was a hero. He spent his days with Clara, teaching her how to ride a horse, how to fish, how to shoot a rifle. He was a father to her, a man who was teaching her the skills she would need to survive in a world that was still a dangerous place. She was a fast learner, a child who was not afraid of the world, but was a child who was now a little more confident, a little more secure. One afternoon, as they were sitting by the river, Clara pointed to a large, flat rock that was half submerged in the water. "The key," she said, her voice a low whisper. "The key is under the stone." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. "What key, Clara?" he asked, his voice low. "The key to the box," she said, her eyes wide. "The key to the shiny. The bad man. He didn't have the key. He looked for it, but it was in the water." Ethan's mind raced. The bounty hunters had had a key to the box. They had found it in Garrett's saddlebag, but maybe there was another key, a key that the serpent was looking for, a key that was in the water. He walked to the rock, and with a careful hand he felt around in the water. He felt something. It was small and it was hard. He pulled it out, and his breath caught in his throat. It was a small, ornate silver key, a perfect match for the keyhole on the box. "The key," Clara said, a look of triumph on her face. "I saw him put it in the water. I saw him throw it." Ethan looked at the key, a small, unassuming thing that held a great secret. The serpent hadn't had the key. He had been looking for it. He had been looking for a key that was under a rock in the water. "It's the key to the treasure, Ethan," Silas said, his voice a low whisper. "The key to the riddle. The key to the fortune." Ethan looked at the key, then at Clara. She was a different child now, a child who was no longer haunted by a past of fear and violence. She was a child who was a hero, a child who had given them the key to her past, a key to her future. She was a small, fragile life, but she was a powerful, resilient one. She was a key to a new life, a new beginning. The discovery of the key changed everything. It was a new piece of the puzzle, a new clue in the search for the serpent and the fortune. The key wasn't a physical key that unlocked a door. It was a key to a riddle, a key to a secret. It was a sign that the serpent, the man who had killed Clara's parents, was not as invincible as they had thought. He had been looking for the key and he had failed. Ethan, Silas, and Marshall Henderson were now on a new mission, a mission to find the serpent, a mission to find the treasure. They were no longer a small, vulnerable trio. They were a small, determined force, a force for justice. They spent the next few days in Harmony Creek, a place that now felt like a safe haven. Marshall Henderson, a man of quiet wisdom, used his connections to find out more about the serpent. He sent a few letters to his contacts in the East, a few quiet inquiries, a few questions about a man who was known for his ruthlessness and his cunning. The answers came back a few days later, in a small, unassuming letter. The serpent was not just a ruthless killer. He was a man who had been a trusted friend of Clara's father. He was a man who had betrayed his friend, a man who had a personal vendetta against him. His name was Marcus Blackwood, a man who had once been a prosperous businessman in the East, a man who had been ruined by Clara's father, and a man who had sworn revenge. The revelation was a chilling one. The serpent was not just an outlaw. He was a man who had a personal vendetta against a family, a man who was driven by a lust for revenge, a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. "He's a ghost," Henderson said, his voice low. "He disappeared years ago. He's probably been living under a new name. He's probably been planning this for years." "He's still out there," Ethan said, his voice grim, "and he's still a threat. He's still looking for the key, he's still looking for the treasure, and he's still a threat to Clara." The words hung in the air, a heavy, unsaid truth. They had to find him. They had to stop him. They had to bring him to justice. They had to do it for Clara's parents. They had to do it for her. They decided to leave Harmony Creek. They had to go to the place where it all began, the place where Clara's parents had found their fortune, the place where the serpent had first found them, the place where the key had been thrown in the water, the place where the big house was, the place where the final confrontation would take place. They were a small, determined group. Ethan, a man who had found his purpose in a world of chaos. Silas, a grizzled old prospector who had a heart of gold. And Clara, a small, fragile life who was a testament to the power of a family's love. They were riding towards a new beginning, a new purpose, a new destiny. They were riding towards a final confrontation. As they rode, Ethan looked at Clara, who was now sleeping in his arms, her head resting on his chest, her small body a bundle of peace and trust. He had found her under a rock, a child who had been left for dead. He had fought for her. He had risked his life for her, and in doing so he had found his destiny. He was no longer just a rancher. He was a guardian, a protector, a hero. He had found his family, and he would not give up. He would fight for her. He would protect her, and he would bring the serpent to justice. The journey to Clara's family's ranch was a long and arduous one. They traveled through a landscape that was both beautiful and unforgiving. They were a small, determined group, a group that was on a mission for justice. They were a small, fragile light in a world of darkness, and they knew they had to be careful, to be smart, and to be one step ahead of the man who had a personal vendetta against them. They reached the ranch, a place that was a ghost of its former self. The big house, as Clara had called it, was a charred husk of wood and stone, a grim testament to the violence that had taken place there. The land around it was a barren wasteland, a place of death and decay. Ethan's heart sank. He had hoped for a place of peace, a place of hope. He had hoped for a place that was a testament to a family's love. He had found a place of sorrow, a place of death. He looked at Clara, who was now standing with him, her small face a picture of a profound sadness. "The fire," she whispered, her voice a low, trembling sound. He started the fire. Ethan knelt down and pulled her into a hug, a tight, powerful embrace that was a silent promise of his love and his protection. "I know, little one," he said, his voice a low, soothing murmur. "I know, but it's over now. It's all over now." They walked through the remains of the house, a place that was now a testament to a family's love and a family's sorrow. They found a small, hidden cellar, a place that had survived the fire. It was a place where a family had once lived, a place where a child had once played. They found a few small broken toys, a few charred books, a few small personal items that had survived the fire. "He was looking for something," Ethan said, his voice low. "He was looking for the fortune. He must have thought it was in the house. He must have thought they had hidden it there." They searched the cellar, their movements careful and methodical. They found nothing. No clues, no riddles, no hints. The fortune was still a mystery. "We have to go back to the river," Silas said, a determined look on his face. "The key. It's not for a box. It's for a riddle. It's a clue. We have to figure it out." They walked back to the river, a place that was a testament to the power of a family's love. They sat by the water and they looked at the key. It was a small, unassuming thing, but it was a key to a secret, a key to a riddle. "The key," Clara said, her voice a little more confident. "The key is the song." Ethan and Silas looked at her, their faces a mask of confusion. "What song, Clara?" Ethan asked, his voice low. "The song," she said, her voice a low, humming sound. She began to hum a tune, a simple, beautiful melody that was filled with a child's love. It was a song that her father had sung to her, a song that was a testament to his love. Ethan's mind raced. The riddle, the key, the song, the words of the song, the melody, were a key to a treasure. They were a clue to a secret. "What were the words, Clara?" Silas said, his voice a low, excited whisper. She hummed the song again, and then a few words came to her, a few fragmented lines of a song. "The sun, the moon, the stars," she said, her voice a low, humming sound. "The heart, the home, the love." Ethan and Silas listened, their hearts pounding in their chests. The words were a riddle, a puzzle, a map to a treasure. They were a key to a new life, a new beginning. They had found the key. They had found the riddle. They had found the treasure. The song was a riddle, a puzzle, a map to a treasure that was a secret from the world. It was a beautiful, simple song, a song that spoke of love, of family, of hope. It was a song that a father had sung to his daughter, a song that was a testament to his love. It was a song that held a secret, a song that held a key. Ethan, Silas, and Clara sat by the river, their minds focused on the song, on the words, on the melody. They knew that the song was not just a song, it was a riddle that was a key to a treasure. "The sun," Ethan said, his voice low. "The sun rises in the east, the moon rises in the west, the stars are in the sky. The heart," Silas said, his voice a low whisper. "The heart is in the body. The home is in the heart. The love is in the home." The words were a puzzle that was a key to a treasure. They were a key to a new life, a new beginning. They were a key to a future. They were a key to justice. They decided to go back to the Blackwood Mesa, the place where it all began, the place where Clara's parents had found their fortune. They knew that the key to the riddle was there. They knew that the treasure was there. They were a small, determined group, a group that was on a mission for justice. They were a small, fragile light in a world of darkness, and they knew they had to be careful, to be smart, and to be one step ahead of the man who had a personal vendetta against them. They reached the mesa, a place that was a ghost of its former self. The land was still scarred by the drought, but it was also a place of a new beginning, a place of a new hope. They looked at the sun, the moon, the stars, the heart, the home, the love. The words of the song, a simple, beautiful melody, a song that was a testament to a father's love, were a guide, a map, a key to a treasure. They walked to the place where Ethan had found Clara, the place where the big stone was. The stone was now a testament to a new beginning, a new purpose. It was a place where a man had found a child, a place where a man had found his purpose. "The home," Clara said, her voice a low, confident whisper. "The home is the rock." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The rock, the home, the love. The words were a puzzle that was a key to a treasure. They were a key to a new life, a new beginning. They looked at the rock, and then they saw it. A small, almost imperceptible inscription on the side of the rock. It was a small, ornate symbol, a symbol that was a key to a new life, a new beginning. "The symbol," Silas said, his voice a low whisper. "It's a map. It's a map to a treasure, a map to a fortune." Ethan's mind raced. The symbol was a map to a treasure, a map to a future. They had found the key, they had found the riddle, they had found the treasure. The symbol on the stone was a map to a treasure, a map to a future. It was a simple, elegant symbol, a symbol that was a testament to a father's love, a symbol that was a key to a new life, a new beginning. They followed the map, a silent, determined group, a group that was on a mission for justice. They walked through the arid, dusty landscape, their movements careful and methodical. They were a small, fragile light in a world of darkness, and they knew they had to be careful, to be smart, and to be one step ahead of the man who had a personal vendetta against them. They reached a small, unassuming cave, a place that was a secret from the world. It was a place that was a testament to a family's love, a place that was a key to a new life, a new beginning. They walked into the cave, and then they saw it. It was a small, unassuming chest, a chest that was hidden in a small, hidden crevice in the wall. The chest was made of rough-hewn wood, and it was locked. But they had the key that was the symbol on the stone. Ethan took the key, and with a careful hand he unlocked the chest. They all leaned in, their eyes fixed on the contents. It wasn't a box of jewels. It was a box of papers, old, yellowed, and carefully folded. They were a jumbled collection of deeds, of maps, of documents. They were a testament to a family's love, a testament to a family's legacy. They were a testament to a family's future. The documents were a testament to a family's land, a large, sprawling ranch, a ranch that was a testament to a family's love, a ranch that was a key to a new life, a new beginning. The ranch was 1,000 acres of fertile land, 1,000 acres of a new life, a new beginning. "It's not a fortune in jewels," Silas said, his voice a low whisper. "It's a fortune in land, a fortune in a new life, a new beginning." Ethan looked at the documents, at the maps, at the deeds. He had found a treasure, a fortune, but he knew the greatest treasure of all was the small, brave girl who was a testament to a family's love. She was a living legacy, a living reminder of a love that was stronger than greed, a love that was stronger than violence. "Oh, we have to go back," Ethan said, his voice grim. "We have to go back to the ranch. We have to claim it. We have to claim her legacy. We have to bring the serpent to justice." The words hung in the air, a heavy, unsaid truth. They had to face him. They had to fight him. They had to win. They had to do it for Clara's parents. They had to do it for her. The journey back to the ranch was a different one. They were no longer a small, fragile trio. They were a small, determined force, a force for justice. They were a small, fragile light in a world of darkness, and they knew they had to be careful, to be smart, and to be one step ahead of the man who had a personal vendetta against them. They reached the ranch, a place that was a ghost of its former self. The big house, as Clara had called it, was a charred husk of wood and stone, a grim testament to the violence that had taken place there. But now it was a place of a new beginning, a place of a new hope. It was a place where a family's legacy would be reclaimed. They were a few hundred yards from the house when they heard a sound, the sound of hoofbeats, a small group approaching from the north, the sound of the serpent. He had come back. He had come back to claim his prize. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He looked at Silas, at Clara, and then he looked at the ranch. This was it. The final confrontation. The final battle. The final moment of truth. "He's here," Silas said, his voice a low whisper. "He's here to finish what he started." Ethan drew his revolver, a well-worn Colt Peacemaker that had saved his life more times than he could count. "We'll be ready," he said, his voice grim. "We'll be ready for him." They hid in the shadows, their rifles ready, their hearts pounding in their chests. They were a small, determined force, a force that was fighting for a child's future, a force that was fighting for justice. They were a small, fragile light in a world of darkness, and they knew they had to win. They had to win for Clara. The serpent and his men rode to the ranch, their movements confident and arrogant. They had no idea they were walking into a trap. They walked to the charred remains of the house, their eyes fixed on the charred husk of wood and stone. "It's gone," the serpent said, his voice a low growl. "The treasure is gone. It's not here." He looked around, his eyes filled with a furious rage. He had come back for a fortune that was a ghost, a fortune that was a memory. He had come back for a vengeance that was now a ghost, a vengeance that was now a memory. "It's here, serpent," Ethan said, his voice a low, steady sound. "The treasure is here. The treasure is the land. The treasure is a new life, a new beginning." The serpent and his men all turned, their hands on their guns. They looked at Ethan, at Silas, at Clara. They looked at a man who was a ghost, a man who was a memory, a man who was a symbol of a past they had tried to erase. "You," the serpent said, his voice a low, angry growl. "You're the one who found her. You're the one who ruined everything. You're the one who's going to die." Ethan raised his revolver, his eyes fixed on the serpent. "I'm not going to die, serpent," he said. "And I'm not going to let you win. Not for all the money in the world, not for all the vengeance in the world." The words hung in the air, a heavy, unsaid truth. The final confrontation had begun. The final battle had begun. The final moment of truth had begun. They were fighting for a child's future, a child's freedom, a child's life. They were fighting for justice, and they would not give up. They would not fail. They would fight until they won. The final confrontation was a fierce and brutal thing, a moment of pure, unadulterated violence. The air was filled with the sound of gunshots, a cacophony of violence and chaos. Ethan, a man who had found his purpose in a world of chaos, fought with a fierce, protective instinct. He was no longer just a rancher. He was a guardian, a protector, a hero. He was a man who was fighting for a child's future. The serpent and his men, driven by greed and a lust for revenge, fought with a brutal, ruthless cunning. They were a force of darkness, a force that was trying to erase a family's legacy, a force that was trying to erase a child's future. But in the end, justice prevailed. The serpent and his men were all killed, their bodies lying in a bloody heap on the floor of the ranch. Ethan and Silas, bruised and battered, were all alive. They had won. They had fought, and they had won. Ethan looked at the body of the serpent, the man who had been a ghost, a man who had been a memory, a man who had been a symbol of a past they had tried to erase. He was a man who had a personal vendetta against a family, a man who had a lust for revenge, a man who had been consumed by a hatred that had destroyed him. Ethan walked to Clara, who was watching him from a distance, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and triumph. She was a child who had seen too much, a child who had been through too much. He knelt down and pulled her into a hug, a tight, powerful embrace that was a silent promise of his love and his protection. "It's over, little one," he said, his voice a low, soothing murmur. "It's all over now. You're safe now. They can't hurt you anymore." Clara looked at him, and for the first time, she smiled a full, genuine smile. It was a small, beautiful thing, a sign of hope, a sign of trust. It was a sign that they were on the right path. They walked to the charred remains of the house, a place that was a testament to a family's love, a place that was a key to a new life, a new beginning. They looked at the land, at the fertile soil, at the rolling hills. This was the treasure, this was the fortune, this was the legacy. "We have to rebuild it," Ethan said, his voice grim. "We have to rebuild the house. We have to rebuild the ranch. We have to rebuild her legacy." Silas nodded, a determined look on his face. "We will, Ethan," he said. "We'll rebuild it. We'll make it a place of peace, a place of hope, a place of love. We'll make it a place where a child can grow up in a world of peace and happiness." Ethan looked at Clara, and a new plan, a new purpose formed in his eyes. He would not just be a guardian, he would be a father. He would not just be a protector, he would be a family. He would not just be a hero. He would be a man who was living a life of purpose, a life of love. He had found his destiny, and it was a destiny that was worth more than all the gold in the world. He had found his family, and he would never let them go. He would fight for her, he would protect her, and he would give her a new life, a life of peace, a life of happiness, a life of hope. The days following the final confrontation were a blur of hard work and quiet healing. The charred remains of Clara's family home stood as a stark reminder of the past, but for Ethan, Silas, and Clara, it was a blank canvas for the future. The first thing they did was bury the serpent and his men in unmarked graves at the edge of the property, a final solemn act to close the book on that chapter of their lives. The earth, still damp from a recent rain, accepted them without ceremony. With the threat gone, the true work began. Ethan, now with the weight of both his own and Clara's legacy on his shoulders, was no longer just a rancher. He was a builder, a reclaimer. He used the deeds and documents they had found to officially register the land in Clara's name, a legal formality handled by Marshal Henderson, who rode out to the ranch specifically for the occasion. The 1,000 acres, once a ghost of a family's dream, was now a promise of a future. Henderson, a man of quiet authority and unwavering integrity, had a long, heartfelt conversation with Ethan. He explained the legalities of a guardianship and the responsibilities that came with it. "She needs a legal guardian, son," Henderson said, his eyes kind. "And after everything you've done, there's no better man for the job." Ethan, without a moment's hesitation, agreed. The emotional bond was already forged. The legal one was simply a formality. The work was relentless. Ethan, with Silas's ever-present guidance, began to rebuild the house. They used the strongest parts of the old foundation, mixing their own new adobe bricks from the rich soil. They hauled timber from the nearby hills, their days filled with the rhythmic thud of axes and the saw's low rasp. Clara, no longer a silent shadow, was a constant presence. She helped in small but meaningful ways, carrying water, sorting nails, and fetching tools. Her small, dusty hands were as busy as theirs. Ethan taught her how to measure wood, how to drive a nail straight, and how to tell a good piece of timber from a bad one. These simple tasks were her first lessons in a world of purpose and creation, a world far removed from the one she had been thrust into. Their conversations, once filled with fragments of a traumatic past, were now centered on the present and the future. Clara, her shyness fading with each passing day, would ask questions about the house. "Where will my room be?" she asked one evening as they sat by the fire, her small face illuminated by the dancing flames. Ethan, a lump of emotion in his throat, would describe a room with a window overlooking the stream, a small bed with a handmade quilt, and a bookshelf filled with books. He was no longer just building a house, he was building a home. Silas, ever the pragmatic old-timer, focused on the land. He taught Ethan and Clara how to read the soil, how to find underground water sources, and how to build fences that would last 100 years. He was a mentor, a guide, and a friend. He was a part of this new family, a man who had found his own purpose in helping others build theirs. He would often sit and watch Ethan and Clara, a small, knowing smile on his face. He saw the love that had bloomed from the arid soil of a desperate time. One morning, as they were raising the frame of the new house, Ethan looked at the Blackfoot Mesa in the distance, the place where he had found her. He thought of the drought, the search for water, the desperate hope that had led him to that moment. He thought of the terrifying discovery, the relentless chase, the final bloody confrontation. It all seemed so distant now, like a story from another life. The past was a memory, a grim one, but a memory nonetheless. The future was now. As the house took shape, so did their lives. Clara's laughter, a sound Ethan never thought he would hear, was a common occurrence. She would chase butterflies in the meadows, splash in the stream, and spend hours whittling small animals from pieces of wood. She was a child again, a child who was safe, a child who was loved. The scar on her face, a grim reminder of her past, seemed to fade a little more each day, a physical manifestation of her emotional healing. Ethan, a man who had lived a life of solitude, now found joy in the simple, mundane moments of a family. He found joy in teaching Clara how to fish, in watching her learn to ride a horse, in reading to her by the fire at night. He was a father, a provider, a protector. He was a man who had found his purpose in the most unexpected of places. The ranch, a place that had once been a ghost of a family's dream, was now a place of life, a place of love, a place of hope. It was a testament to the power of a promise kept, a testament to the strength of a new family. It was a new beginning. As the seasons turned, so did the fortunes of the ranch. The drought, a distant memory now, had given way to a bountiful spring and a verdant summer. The land, once parched and brittle, now pulsed with life. The newly built house, a testament to their hard work, stood proud and strong, a beacon of hope in the heart of the valley. It was a place where a new family was taking root, a place where a new legacy was being built. Ethan and Silas, a formidable duo, had a vision for the ranch, a vision that went beyond a simple cattle operation. They used the fertile soil and the abundant water from the stream to plant a variety of crops. They planted corn, wheat, and a small vegetable garden that Clara tended to with a fierce, protective love. The work was hard, but it was a labor of love. They were not just working for a living, they were working for a future. Clara, now a happy, energetic 7-year-old, was a constant source of joy and a full-fledged member of their small team. She no longer spoke in whispers or fragmented sentences. Her voice, a clear and melodic sound, was filled with a childlike curiosity and a newfound confidence. She would ask Ethan questions about the land, about the stars, about the meaning of life. He would answer them with a quiet patience, a man who had found his purpose in teaching a child how to live. One evening, as they were sitting by the fire, a large, beautiful fire, now that wood was plentiful, Clara asked Ethan a question that had been on his mind for weeks. "Ethan," she said, her voice a low, serious sound, "are you my father?" The question, so simple and so profound, hung in the air, a silent, powerful thing. Ethan looked at her, his heart filled with an emotion he had never known before. He had loved her from the moment he found her, a small, fragile life in a vast, desolate world. He had fought for her, he had risked his life for her, and in doing so, he had found his purpose. He was her guardian, her protector, her hero. He was a father to her in every way that mattered. He knelt down and pulled her into a hug, a tight, powerful embrace that was a silent promise of his love and his protection. "Yes, Clara," he said, his voice a little shaky. "Yes, I am. I'm your father." Clara hugged him back, a fierce, powerful embrace. "I love you, Father," she said, a small tear running down her cheek. "I love you very much." The words were a gift that was worth more than all the gold in the world. They were a testament to a bond that had been forged in the crucible of a desperate time. They were a testament to a love that was stronger than greed, a love that was stronger than violence. They were a testament to a new beginning. The ranch, once a place of a ghost of a family's dream, was now a place of a new family's reality. It was a place where a new life was being built, a place where a new legacy was being forged. The old life, the old sorrow was now a memory, a distant echo in the wind. The future was now. As the sun set, a fiery orange and purple ball of light on the horizon, Ethan, Silas, and Clara sat by the fire, their faces illuminated by the dancing flames. They were a family that had been forged in the crucible of a desperate time. They were a family that had found their purpose in a world of chaos. They were a family that had found their destiny in a world of hope. The final chapter of their story was not a tale of a hero's journey, but a tale of a family's love. It was a tale of a man who had found his purpose in a world of chaos, a tale of a child who had found her destiny in a world of hope, a tale of a family that had found their legacy in a world of promise. It was a story that was still being written, a story that would be told for generations to come. It was a story that was a testament to the power of a promise kept, a testament to the strength of a new family. It was a new beginning. Years passed, a steady rhythmic march of time marked by the changing seasons and the growth of the ranch. The Ghost Ranch was a name spoken only by old-timers now, a legend whispered around campfires. In its place stood the Thorne Homestead, a thriving, prosperous operation that was the envy of the valley. The new house, a testament to Ethan and Silas's shared vision and hard work, was a large, sturdy structure, with a wide front porch and a chimney that puffed a friendly plume of smoke in the cool mountain air. The corrals were full of healthy, well-fed cattle, and the fields, once a barren wasteland, now produced a bountiful harvest. Clara, now a young woman of 17, was no longer the small, silent child Ethan had found under a rock. She was a tall, graceful, and fiercely intelligent young woman, with her mother's brilliant green eyes and her father's quiet strength. She had a sharp mind, a keen wit, and a deep, abiding love for the land that had saved her. She was a master of the ranch, a skilled rider, and a crack shot with a rifle. She was a testament to a life well lived, a life that had been built on a foundation of love and hard work. Ethan, now a man in his late 50s, his hair a distinguished silver and his face etched with a lifetime of experience, was no longer just a rancher. He was a pillar of the community, a man whose word was his bond, a man who was respected and loved by all. He had found a peace he never knew he was looking for, a peace that was found not in a life of solitude, but in a life of purpose. He was a father in every sense of the word, a man who had given a child a future, a man who had found his destiny in a world of hope. Silas, a grizzled old man with a heart of gold, was still a fixture on the ranch. He was no longer just a guide, but a grandfather figure, a man who was filled with a sense of pride and joy in the family he had helped to build. He would often sit on the porch, watching Clara and Ethan, a small knowing smile on his face. He had seen a man's heart change, a man's life transform, a man's legacy built on a foundation of love. One evening, as the sun set in a fiery blaze of orange and purple, Clara sat with her father on the porch. The air was filled with the scent of pine and a distant smell of wood smoke. The stars, a brilliant tapestry of light, were beginning to appear in the inky blackness of the sky. "Father," Clara said, her voice a low, steady sound, "I want to go to the city. I want to go to school. I want to learn more. I want to build a better life for us all." The words, so simple and so profound, were a gift that was a testament to a life well lived. Ethan looked at her, his heart filled with a mix of pride and a little sadness. He had known this day would come. He had known that she would want to explore the world beyond the valley. He had given her a future, and now he had to let her go. "I know," he said, his voice a little shaky, "and I'll help you. I'll give you everything you need. You're my daughter, Clara, and I'll be here for you no matter what, no matter where you go." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, a silent, powerful gesture of her love and her gratitude. "I'll come back, Father," she said. "I'll come back to the ranch. I'll come back to you. I'll come back to our home." The words were a promise that was a testament to a bond that had been forged in the crucible of a desperate time. They were a testament to a love that was stronger than greed, a love that was stronger than violence. They were a testament to a new beginning. Ethan looked at the world he had built, at the home he had made, at the family he had found. He had found a treasure, a fortune, but he knew the greatest treasure of all was the small brave girl who was a testament to a family's love. She was a living legacy, a living reminder of a love that was stronger than greed, a love that was stronger than violence. She was a promise of tomorrow, a promise of a future that was built on a foundation of love and hope. He had found his destiny, and it was a destiny that was worth more than all the gold in the world. He had found his family, and he would never let them go.